This is The Baseline, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA.
Welcome, everybody. You're tuned to The Baseline. Callie Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. It is the official Baseline NBA podcast, NBA Draft Watch Party. And as always, I love rolling out the red carpet to my right-hand man, the person I've been doing this for more than a decade. My brother from another mother, Mr. Warren Shaw, ripping out of Fort Lauderdale, Florida. What's good, my brother? On to the next chapter of some young, upcoming, possible superstars to grace this great game called the NBA. And what better way to do it than by having our first official NBA Draft Watch Party?
Shout out to Millions, for queuing us up and allowing us to kind of jump through their platform and make this thing kind of pop and rock. But yeah, this is an exciting time for us. And while we will not sit here and claim to be your draft experts, you and I don't watch the college game intently throughout the course of the 5-month season or whatever it is. At this point, we all become college basketball fans right after March Madness because these young guys, these young men are now entering the NBA fold. So this is an exciting situation for us to be able to kind of give some of our live reactions. But I thought it was apropos for us to do that this year because there is so much chatter. There is so much conversation, so many things happening around the draft. That's not even necessarily just draft related. So this platform gives us a chance to kind of talk about all the things that's been happening in the NBA with the draft as the backdrop to kind of some of the conversations that are going to be permeating throughout the course of the rest of this summer.
Yeah, I think as well, too, it also helps to propel the NBA draft to the forefront, given some of the moves that have taken place already post NBA finals with teams basically adjusting their rosters. And it kind of opens up the window a little bit for us to now take into consideration who may be selected, in the 2025 NBA draft because of the way that teams, the executives have made the decisions, moving forward. So we could very well see a shift, so to speak. I know a lot of people are paying more attention to the moves that the teams are making, but if those moves are being made, it could very well be because they have reevaluated the stock that is available to us and seeing how important a role some of these young kids are going to be. It's kind of unique to me, Shaw, because over the last few years, it's really been more about the free agency. But I think this could also help propel a lot of these young stars and give an opportunity for them to actually step in immediately and have an immediate impact. So I'm really looking forward to how this may actually play out, given what's happened over the last 72 hours, even since the Oklahoma City Thunder hoisted that NBA trophy.
Yeah, one of the things too is like the condensed NBA schedule. So for folks like you and I, this is like, oh man, like it's just kind of like go time. The NBA finals just ended and we're already jumping into the NBA draft, especially because we ended up getting 7 games. So the NBA has been kind of angling this for a little while for that level of just kind of like, boom, one thing is done. Hey, and we got the next thing for you ready right now. And that is absolutely happening this year. It feels like there's been like no days off. And we're right here now trying to discuss the future of the league. In addition to that, though, the way that this collective bargaining kind of agreement was negotiated or renegotiated, where basically the NBA Finals is the last day of the kind of like the fiscal season, so to speak. And now you're seeing all this trade activity, couple of days, even some stuff happening while the NBA Finals were going on. The Pacers themselves even made a trade while the finals were going on. So this is where we're at in today's NBA, like very, very fast paced, all the action, all the information, all the time. And we're right here with you, man. We're right here to kind of keep it rocking and rolling here with the Baseline NBA podcast, brother.
Absolutely. So right now, the NBA draft has officially begun with the Dallas Mavericks are now on the clock. And listen, all expectations are that they are going to select Cooper Flagg to be the number 1 overall draft pick. No surprise there. I think to me, though, Shaw, given what has now just happened with Kyrie Irving signing that 3-year extension, does that window for the Dallas Mavericks still seem like it's an extended project, or is there like high how do you want to say is there high in praise possibly on the idea that by getting Cooper Flagg and pairing him with Kyrie Irving, they don't have to fall completely far off, given what we've seen everything with the Western Conference and how it's played out.
I'm intrigued by the question, right? Because you were right there rocking alongside with me when Nico Harrison made the big splash of trading Luka in the middle of the season. And his words were like, well, yeah, we're not resetting anything. We're not rebuilding anything. We're ready to compete right now, right away. Then, of course, Kyrie goes down and you feel like, okay, well, maybe while his best laid plans, that maybe wouldn't actually come to fruition. Then the basketball gods smile upon the Dallas Mavericks, and it pissed a lot of people off that they somehow lucked into the number one pick. And now Cooper Flag, to join this roster, I'm looking back at the screen to make sure that they're making the pick in here right now.
Yeah, don't catch a nexusism, right?
But this Mavs team is poised to be competitive literally right away. Kyrie's not necessarily done for all of next season. He could come back by February or so, and this Mavs team, if they stay above water, so to speak, they can get in the plan, or maybe they can actually capture a 6 seed with a healthy Anthony Davis. I think Bobby Marks said right before we went on air that they are very much going to try to get a starting level point guard to fill the gap, to bridge the gap between now and when Kyrie ultimately returns. And they have some mechanisms to be able to do that. But in the short term, it allows Cooper Flag the opportunity to get reps, learn under AD, play both sides of the basketball. Jason Kidd is clearly not going anywhere. He's not going to go be the New York Knicks coach, I think, anytime soon. And the Mavs can be right in the middle of this hunt in the Western Conference as soon as this upcoming season. I'm not saying NBA championship per se, but I don't think they're not going to necessarily need to be destitute and take steps back that many thought was going to happen after Kyrie got injured last year.
Well, and to add to your point, I think part of the reason why you can feel optimistic if you're a Dallas Mavericks fan, especially when you make the selection with Cooper Flag, is it opens up the opportunity, one, that you're going to have Cooper Flag kind of on the cheap, right? He's going to be on that rookie deal. And so you're going to already have still a seasoned championship pedigree player that's going to be paired alongside Cooper Flag at some point during the course of the year or two, right? Within the first 2 years, you still have Klay Thompson, right? What I find interesting is that on that play, we've just recently seen the Boston Celtics make a play and move a veteran championship guard in Jrue Holiday. I wonder if the Dallas Mavericks are thinking, hey, there's still more left in, out there for them to be able to do this. Like maybe it didn't seem realistic, but because of these injuries and the shift of how the Oklahoma City Thunder wound up winning this championship, I think now it's like open season on taking a risk on anything you do, because you're not going to sharply fall off what your intentions would be, especially if you have an inside track on the lottery pick for this year's draft.
Yeah, again, Dallas they've lucked out. They really have. They've lucked out in a way that a lot of franchises and organizations just don't. And so to be able to get this level of talent, potentially in here in year one, the Duke coach was literally saying like, yeah, year one, I can predict, 17-7-7, we think from this guy. And then he's kind of getting up. Yeah. Then maybe a 19-8-8, and then like a 24-9-9. Like that is the level of player that people think this guy is going to be. And that allows Dallas to just be right in the middle of all things this year and for the foreseeable future, you would imagine. Because if he's really as good as advertised, this now also, why would other players want to come play with him, right? Once as Kyrie and AD eventually age out, so to speak. Well, Cooper's now the air quote the franchise. If everything goes the way that everyone is saying it is, then Dallas again just has like this very, very long runway to be competitive. I think with ownership now that doesn't want to make another mistake, and that's not to say that they won't. But I think they're going to be very cautious and even more strategic that they have been, because they saw the fallout of this, and lightning has really struck for them to be able to get another bite at the apple here with another franchise level type player.
I do think it's a little surprising though, Shaw, that they know that they're going in here getting ready to select Cooper Flag. They still have Derek Lively. They just re-signed Daniel Gafford. So I'm kind of interested on how they're planning to build out this front court, right? Because it's hard for me to see Cooper Flag probably playing the 3, right? But it isn't without the realm of reason, because, Jason Kidd could be a creative guy, and Cooper Flag does have that kind of versatility, how dynamic a player is and how he can be able to kind of get up to NBA speed as quickly as possible could prove versatility for a Dallas Mavericks team that's going to be a few pieces away. So I'm really interested in this dynamic in and of itself, because the Dallas Mavericks could have pivoted and we don't know. We don't know. Maybe they may look to move, Derek Lively and keep the combination of Gafford and say Flag, or they could go with all three because they can see how platooning both Lively and Gafford has worked well for them over the last year and a half.
Yeah, I think the guy to watch in this is probably PJ Washington, whether or not he's long for this Dallas Mavericks roster, both short and long term, or whether or not they try to utilize his contract in essence to be able to play things out. I think you maybe go into the season saying, hey, you know what? We have all this depth at the front court. Anthony Davis is injury, I don't say injury prone, but he's struggled to stay healthy, a good portion of the season, though he's, played most of the games in the last 2 years, except with obviously, after the trade this year went down. But I think this Mavericks team is just really, really, really situated for, ultimate success with the roster that they currently have, especially now that the pick is finally, and I don't know what was going on there.
Because it had to be, amped up, man. We had to make this thing a movie, right? Who was that guy from ESPN? Smith. He was out there in like North Carolina, Duke land. And they're making it an SEC thing because Cooper Flag's being selected. It's a thing. Hey, before you move on to the next point, show. Shout out to our man P Money who chimed in. He was saying, thinking like how I was thinking as well too. I appreciate that, man, because sometimes I feel like I'm just kind of by my lonesome. So, but he indicated like he was just going to ask if whether or not Cooper Flag plays more the 3 or the 4, given Dallas's size. And I think that to me is what resonates with the future of Cooper Flag, is that if he comes in instantly and displays that level of versatility, something that he didn't really have to worry about being as with the Duke Blue Devils, because they had such a very well-rounded team. But if he comes in and shows you that level of athleticism, that level of grittiness, playing that 4-5, but with the speed and the athleticism of a 3, this could be a very, very, very good situation for a guy like Jason Kidd, because him, man. He likes to kind of mold guys similar to the guys that he used to run, make those championship runs with when he was with the New Jersey Nets and then with the Dallas Mavericks. So I would not be surprised if Jason Kidd is not sitting here like licking his chops thinking about how he can mold the future of Cooper Flag through his eyes of what the current NBA looks like. Yeah,
I mean, and that's where we're in a versatile NBA. And so I think, with PJ Washington and, Cooper Flag, they're interchangeable, I think, at this stage. That kind of 3-4 position is very much something that we see people playing kind of both, right? Even to jump way, way, way out. But I heard something about, depending on how the Celtics move, Jaylen Brown could play some 4 this year. And I was like, well, that's wild. But he's been playing a lot of 3 as, trying to backfill for Tatum. So I think Flag's size, his versatility, and especially the way that he's going to lock in defensively, because he's not somebody who's just trying to be, an offensive only type player and a creator. That allows Dallas and Jason Kidd a lot of different options there too. In addition to, again, you have Max Christie that, will probably get a couple more reps too. Will play 2 and 3. So you'll see multiple lineups where the Mavs will be able to have size out there basically all across the board. And that's really what Nico Harrison is really about right now. He wants his team to be defensive minded and defensive focused. And with all the guys they have currently on the roster, with the addition of Flag, as we just saw a couple minutes ago, that gives them the utmost versatility, both I think offensively, but even more importantly for them defensively.
I know we're gonna pivot, because at some point we're gonna have to talk about who's coming in at number 2, because that's what I'm saying the elephant in the room was gonna be after Cooper Flag. Then who, right? And the teams that are positioned to make those type of selections, what are they now looking for? And again, I go back to what we were just talking about earlier, in the way that the Oklahoma City Thunder went out and won this NBA championship. And we had mentioned this in our previous show when we did our Game 7 wrap up. People are not, teams are not scared of the Oklahoma City Thunder. They certainly can respect them and can certainly be cautious of them, but they're not looking at this team and saying to themselves, there isn't any aspect to what they present, even from a defensive perspective, in which we build up our roster, we can actually run with these guys. So it'll be very interesting to see how, again, these teams that are situated in the lottery, if they're only 1 or 2 players away, those type of players that they're going after to help round them out. And I wanted to touch on one thing that you just said a moment ago with regards to Max Christie. Let's not forget, Max Christie came in And while the person has the size of a 3, he actually can play the 2 guard as well too. And I would not be surprised if he takes some Klay Thompson minutes when the Dallas Mavericks need to hunker down and play defensive-minded basketball at times to be able to switch out. So again, there's a lot of versatility at play here, but it only happens with one of those centerpieces in the front court level that can score and that can also defend, which is why the Cooper Flag selection, to your point about Nico Harrison looking out on this one, the Cooper Flag selection is so timed, right? Even though it's luck, it's still very much timed because it really opens up the door.
What's the old adage? Sometimes it's better to be lucky than good. And, you know, whether or not you think Nico Harrison is good at his job, he sure as hell was very lucky here. P-Money typing back in with another question. Yeah, like I said, I definitely think one of those guys get moved. I'd be surprised if it's Lively simply because he's still on the younger side, you know, and provides, you know, some real versatility at that 5 spot. Obviously, he and AD, like if Lively could be AD ever in his life, like that's not a realistic situation, but this is the perfect person to kind of learn under and be the backup for. I think Washington is probably the guy that ultimately gets moved for Dallas to get whatever depth that they may need within their lineup. Shout out to our guy Tyler jumping in as well too on the YouTube, brother. Good to see you, family. Love what you're doing over the GI. We're gonna play a GI commercial in a little while as well too, brother. So stay tuned on that.
I know you're amped up on that one, man. We might have to cut a promo for you. You know what I'm saying? Because you're tuned to the base. You're tuned to the baseline. Callie Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Our first, which will hopefully be of many, NBA baseline NBA podcast watch party, draft watch party 2025. Cooper Flag has just been selected by the Dallas Mavericks. He is the official number 1 pick for the NBA draft for 2025.
Dylan Harper just selected by the San Antonio Spurs. So I think we need to pivot to that.
So pivot to that, right? Okay, so Dylan Harper. Much has been said about Dylan Harper. Much has been said about, you know, his game. Obviously, he is a part of the basketball lineage in the Harper family. Listen, there's a lot of opportunity for him. They say that, you know, he carries a whole lot of upside. What I especially appreciate about him at his size is that his wingspan is very deceptive to what people perceive for someone who's only 6'4.5", right? So this could be a it could be a hidden gem get, because I know all the focus is going to be on Cooper Flag and what he does for his rookie season. But I dare people, watch for this kid, Dylan Harper, man. He really showed up and showed out. I caught glimpses of him and playing for Rutgers. Obviously, I'm here in New Jersey, but much has been said about, you know, what he can do and what his capabilities are, man. So I really wasn't surprised by it. I was a little surprised that more people were trying to say that he may slip, so to speak, but there's no question in my mind that if you're looking for a guard with a ton of upside, he's probably the best of the crop.
Yeah, I think San Antonio, they're lucky and good. And so the fact that they slide all the way up, we're all watching the draft lottery like there's no way they can get number 1 in back-to-back, not back-to-back years, but a year after this, and then if they could have been able to add Castle, Flag, and Wemby three years in a row.
That'd be a problem.
Well, but they're still adding Dylan Harper, Castle,
right,
and Wemby 3 years in a row. The opportunities are endless. And the Spurs were shopping this pick, or at least I shouldn't say they were shopping. They were at least being asked about it potentially because, do you really need this? Because KD, Giannis, all these other big names that we talked a lot about on the show throughout the course of the year, do the Spurs just need to throw accelerant on this thing? So they added De'Aaron Fox, obviously, through the course of the year.
Shaw, would you have wanted it, though? Would you have wanted that? Would you have wanted the San Antonio Spurs to make a play on any of those guys rather than kind of doing what they're doing right now? Because let me get your thoughts on that first before I chime in with my perspective on that.
I think the short answer to your question is it's only Giannis, had he actually been available, that I would do that for. I would not have done it for KD. I just wouldn't, because I think he's just too far progressed into his career where the accelerant isn't going to put San Antonio in that space to be a championship level now. But I think you add a guy like Dylan Harper into this, allow him to grow with Castle and obviously Wemby and Fox. And this is in a timeline that you can really see and naturally progress 2 and 3 years out to be really competitive in the Western Conference. I think this is the right move. This is the right pick. And the Spurs organization has always been one of class, grace, and really, truly actual organization and foresight. So for them to be able to do this right now, get the number 2 pick, not kind of succumb to the overtures of whatever else might have been out there. Like, to me, there's only one person that they could have potentially like really made an offer for here. And if the Bucks were trying to move Giannis, yes. Anybody else? Nah, keep Dylan Harper and keep it pushing.
All right. So our man Tyler is throwing in a little accelerant in there. You think they're going to move off of Swiper?
That's an interesting call. I think that's an interesting call.
My man Tyler, there he goes.
But it's not impossible. Like, it's not something that cannot happen. Again, because Castle can play the 1. But I think you're talent rich. It's another situation where we know guys like Keldon Johnson may not be long for the Spurs world. Devin Vassell, obviously a very good basketball player, but now with Harper here, do you need both?
What about Sohan? I that's what I'm saying.
Not
like
offensively gifted, but obviously defensively gifted, and somebody who can do some play creation and can kind of be one of those like kind of high level glue guys within this team. So I don't think Sohan's going out there and getting you top level talent, but some people can be intoxicated by what Devin Vassell could potentially do, or what De'Aaron Fox can potentially do. I don't know, man. I think the Spurs are going to kind of keep all their cards in and like, let's see what we got and see how it is. But they have so many options now by continuing to accumulate the talent, especially when you add Dylan Harper to this mix.
So to your point that you were saying earlier, the reason why I like the Spurs getting Harper is because I believe that even if you went out and you got one of those veteran players, I don't know where the growth is going to be for any of the guys that you're looking at to surround Wemby, right? And I think for someone like Wemby, he needs guys next to that I think he can help elevate and build up. I think a lot of people misread the skill set of what Victor Wembanyama can actually offer you. I think the levels to his greatness, and I think you may have, hinted at it a few times, Shaw, when you spoke glowingly about Victor Wembanyama and where he can assert his dominance and assert a lasting legacy. Everything that he is doing from a numbers perspective, like the blocks, everything from that statistics really means nothing if the guys around him don't really grow with how he plays this game of basketball. And I think sometimes we get a little enamored with saying you put a veteran guy next to a guy like Wemby and, because it's about him winning the championships. I would probably challenge and say, put me next to a couple of guys who actually see what he's bringing to the table and rides with that and elevates that. And now you have an OKC Thunder-like kind of growth, right? Where it opens the door for the San Antonio Spurs general manager. And let's remember now, they have a new Jefe, right? The new Jefe, I think, now can actually sit back and look at holistically what Wemby truly needs rather than only worrying about coaching up 1, 4, 5 players. He's actually putting a roster of players that he wants Mitch Johnson to coach up, but it's going to ultimately be what Wemby gives you collectively that these guys can grow and blossom and become a force for at least the next 3-4 years. So that's the reason why I like the Harper move, because I think with the upside part that people misperceive with him, what he's capable of doing can really complement a person like that at little the cost or, kind of minimizing Wemby's legacy about how good a player he could truly be over the next few years.
Yeah, I think that is, excellent points. But this is where everyone said the draft was starting with at pick 3. So let's take a quick break. Let's pay our GI guys some homage real quick and come back here in 30 seconds.
Welcome, everybody, to the Gimmick Infringement Podcast. I am Brad Winchester.
And I am Tyler McDowell Blanken. Join us every week on GI, where we talk about what happened in pop culture, our lives, and most importantly, professional wrestling.
When we're back here on the Baseline NBA podcast. So before we cut to the quick break, we talked a little bit about you were kind of waxing poetically about the San Antonio Spurs, but Nevertheless, everybody, all draft experts said the draft really starts at 3. And as Ace Bailey started to drop in the draft prospects because he wasn't working out and whatever other people were thinking were the issues going on here, the Philadelphia 76ers, who I've had to ruminate on this, and we can talk about this later in the summer, but as we say, that the landscape of the East is changing dramatically, literally quickly every single day as unfortunate big name guys are going down, and we've just kind of thrown dirt and buried the 76ers five times over and feel like they have no chance of doing anything next year. I'm just like, well, I was like, well, again, imagine if this year Embiid stays pseudo healthy and Paul George gets back in there. You have Tyrese Maxey, you have Jared McCain. The Sixers wind up again lucky with the number 3 pick, and they go ahead and select VJ Edgecombe. VJ is a guy who Ringer is saying probably not best case scenario, but maybe a player comp for those back in the day, Eddie Jones. Wiry, strong defender, can shoot the 3, can do a little play creation. Why would you not use that as a compliment? So he's not somebody who's going to have the basketball in his hand and necessarily take touches away, from Maxey, Embiid, and or George. And he can if maybe some of those guys are out. I think he's just like the perfect complement to what they need to do here. If they do end up keeping him, I think this is a smart pick if they're just not into the Ace Bailey crowd and mantra of whatever's happening on with his situation. VJ Edgecombe makes a lot of sense, and I think this is a smart move by Daryl Morey.
It's a smart move by Daryl Morey. It does make me ask the question, though. Obviously, is there another play ahead regardless, right? So to your credit, Shaw, what you're speaking to is spot on. You don't want to be caught in the limelight of the pick, especially if there is going to be another play at hand, whether it involves Edgecombe or it involves something with your current roster. What I'm more interested about is, what are we expecting now for Jared McCain when he comes off of injury, and how he had that, there was that small window where he basically showed flashes, helping probably the 76ers come out of the doldrums of such a disappointing season. He was like the only the shining star, so to speak, in what was a tumultuous season for the Philadelphia 76ers. He's going to be coming back, and I definitely see him kind of picking up where he left off, not immediately, but certainly through at some particular point because of Nick Nurse and, his coaching acumen and what he's able to do. Then you also couple that with a guy like Tyrese Maxey. And I'm just saying to myself, I'm like, I hope this doesn't become a situation where the 76ers get too guard heavy or guard happy. If there is that versatility and athleticism that they really see as an upside for what Edgecombe can do for the Sixers, does that make Paul George expendable? Or does that mean, again, to what you were just saying before, what you were alluding before, is there's another play at hand?
Yeah, and we don't know. So we need to watch Utah here at 5 and see if they're doing anything, not necessarily nefarious, but interesting, that can maybe flip this draft on its head. They have sniffed around, I think, Paul George. I just don't know how real those rumors are. And, I've seen it from pseudo-relevant accounts, maybe, and then maybe some of it has been aggregated. But you continue to you continue to bring in talent into your roster. That gives you the most amount of flexibility to make decisions in the short term and the midterm future. So whether or not PG is healthy enough to actually contribute to the 76ers team, you get a guy like Edgecombe who can play some 2 and probably play some 3 as well too. I think he's 6'3", 6'4". And then it allows that. And PG is also somebody who's versatile. Like we've seen him play as much as the 2 all the way up to the 4 as well. So I think the Sixers, again, are poised with this to figure out, is this a roster that gives us both short-term and long-term viability? But I like the addition of Edgecombe, especially with McCain coming back. You figure Edgecombe comes off the bench for them next year and spells, either McCain and or Paul George, at that 2-3 slot, throughout the course of this upcoming season. Again, if this roster stays as intact as it is currently.
And to your point, remember, what you were saying earlier before is that Edgecombe is the kind of guy that he could play without the ball. Yep. And I think that's something that the Philadelphia 76ers are definitely going to have to kind of put in as far as takeaways for this upcoming season, simply because the ball stays in Joel Embiid's hands, I think, a little too much, right? And if you've got a guy like Tyrese Maxey, who I think is a dynamic playmaker, but the ball also sticks in his hands as well, too, because he is arguably one of the fastest and most explosive players in the NBA. I think that it then will allow some of those role players the opportunity to have a more dynamic impact if they show you that they're capable of putting themselves in that position, playing next to a guy like Maxey or playing next to a guy like George. So again, great selection by Daryl Morey. And as always, you know what I'm saying, Shaw? Very good, keen, you know what I'm saying, assessment of the talent in the heady executive play moves. I see where the NBA podcasts that we normally listen to like to play checkers. My friend, love to play chess.
Look at you out here with all the accolades. But the other part of this, though, is and it's an interesting point for me, at least, is we're moving away from in the NBA, like truly from the traditional point guard. And so the notion of, well, can I have 2 or 3 guys on the court who can play create, right, and make the secondary pass and hit open cutters and shooters, on the wing? It's not always point guard, dribble, pick and roll, kick out and spray. Do you have enough guys out there who can do that? So Edgecombe provides some of that secondary play creation pieces. I think about, it's not a player comp, but I think about a guy like Desmond Bane, again, not a high 7-8 assist guy, but he'll get you 3-4 assists, and can do some things kind of in a pinch. All those types of players are even more valuable in today's league. And Edgecombe provides that, I think, for a Philadelphia team that doesn't have like the intimate and ultimate play creator. Because again, I think you say Maxey is an electrifying, fast dude, but he's not like this elite level, passer, right? He can get by guys and he's not selfish, but he's not like this mastermind play creator. So the more guys out there who are competent when it comes to being able to create offense, and I trust Nick Nurse in terms of being dynamic enough. And we know if Embiid is healthy, all things are going to flow through him anyway. In that one healthy season, Embiid averaged the most assists that he'd ever had in his career under Nick Nurse. So we understand that this is something that Philadelphia might be excited about, and not having to go the route of a traditional point guard.
All right. And it looks like the Charlotte Hornets, are on the clock, and they've now selected Con Nipple, right?
Con Nipple from Duke.
From Duke. It's a Duke party. It's a Duke party. So I know we didn't get an opportunity to talk about the Charlotte Hornets, Shaw. I know that there's been speculations about LaMelo Ball being traded to, if it hasn't already happened, being traded to the Los Angeles Clippers. And look.
Well, that's his dad campaigning for that more than anything else.
Which is fine. Even if that's not the case, I do see where if you are the Charlotte Hornets, you need some cultural stability, right? And I'm gonna actually lean on one of our our man Tyler, right? He actually provided this assessment regarding VJ as VJ Edgecombe, the last pick, right, going to the Philadelphia 76ers, seeing him as an awesome culture piece for the Philadelphia 76ers. And I'm thinking that part of the narrative that's happening here, especially because of what's happening to Ace Bailey, is that if they're going to go lottery, even if we don't buy into whether or not these guys are going to be stars, future rookie of the years or all NBA guys, they have to be core foundational pieces, like guys that can help change the culture, change the narrative that has kind of besmirched the organizations that have struggled to become successful and be consistently successful. So this could actually be a play that actually, is a good move for the Charlotte Hornets, because I think time and time again, every time they've been involved in the lottery, whoever they've selected has fallen short of at least helping to establish a level of consistent winning culture. And winning doesn't mean just wins in the column. I'm talking wins as far as people buying into the fact that they have a legitimate team that's going to go out and that's going to compete. There's not going to be a lot of drama. There's not going to be a lot of meism that's going on. This could be actually a good thing for the Duke Blue Devils, is to actually think outside the box. It can't be a wasted pick. He's going to actually come in and immediately contribute. My God, Charlotte needs everything that you could possibly think of to improve. So it can only go up for them. But I think at the end of it, whoever they're getting has to be character worthy, so to speak, like people can buy into that,
Yeah. And Khan definitely represents that. Again, Duke, a high level program, with Blue Bloods or whatever. And I think just what he brings, especially with his floor spacing, and he's, again, secondary play creation as well too. I can just imagine like LaMelo, he can be the release when LaMelo gets wild and jumps in the air. It's like, oh, where do I go? he can kick it out to Knipple, and Knipple can knock down those jumpers, or take it one dribble off the bounce and maybe find another person cutting to the basket. The thing that makes this really interesting for me here now is because we know Brandon Miller is on the rise, and Brandon Miller, I think, is going to play really great alongside Knipple. I don't know if Knipple is going to come here and start immediately, but what it does bring me a question to is what really now is the future of Miles Bridges. So he is on an expiring contract. I think as you're talking about the Charlotte Hornets and the cultural aspect of who they are as an organization, the me ball that LaMelo seems to play as well, does Miles Bridges fit alongside that? Or is it time to get off the Miles Bridges train here, make room for more space for Brandon Miller, and obviously allow Knipple to step into this as well? This team still has, I think they still have Josh Green on the roster. Again, you're not going to not make moves because you have Josh Green, but he's somebody who wants reps as well too at that 2-3 position. Who knows what's going on with Mark Williams at the center spot? He may still get shipped out before the summer is out. Grant Williams is due to come back from his injury as well. So they have a couple of guys who are going to play couple of the same positions, obviously not in the case of the Williamses, if you will, but I do wonder really for sure what ends up happening with Miles Bridges here with Knipple here now in tow. Does that make him more expendable and allow Charlotte to maybe get off some money here to try to really continue to build on their future?
I know right now there, as far as there's a TV break taking place with the NBA draft, and I think the Utah Jazz are on the clock. I want to harp on something you just talked about with regards to Brandon Miller. And I'm saying this because I don't want to sound disrespectful to, LaMelo Ball. I don't want to sound disrespectful to Miles Bridges. But to your point, if the future of the Charlotte Hornets is going to be, say, having a guy like Brandon Miller, I don't think it can be the combination of Miller and Ball, Miller and Bridges. And I'm not trying to say it should be the combination of Miller and Knipple. But what I am saying is that I think if you move off of both Ball and both Bridges, I think whoever that you're going to get as a point guard, Miller has enough versatility and shot making ability that he can be paired with a guard who doesn't necessarily have to go out there and score you buckets, but can really be a good floor general to allow him to grow. And I think with a catch and shoot, create kind of guy like with Knipple, I think that can open things up. So again, Shaw, it's an interesting point that you're alluding to, because I'm not saying that Miles Bridges is a meism type of person, but I also believe that there's a false sense of camaraderie there that I think Bridges would want to stick it out because the Charlotte Hornets stuck with him through his off the court issues. But I just don't know what the type of player that Bridges has been. He reminds me a little bit like Julius Randle, you know what I'm saying? In the sense that like that ball tends to stick with him, because he knows that there's really not a whole lot of other talented players out there, with the exception of LaMelo Ball, that he has to contend with. And I think that narrative is going to change if you have a healthy Brandon Miller. And now that you have a guy like Knipple, there's going to be more ball. There's going to be more opportunities for the ball to go in the basket with those guys than I do see with, say, a Bridges and a LaMelo Ball.
Yeah, sorry, and I misspoke. Bridges has 2 years left on his deal. He's not on it expiring. But the other thing, too, is for Charlotte, we talk about this when we record throughout the course of the season. A lot of teams don't understand who they really are because they've been dealing with injuries for so long. So there's the role delineation that doesn't happen that is supposed to happen because guys are out. So guys like Miles Bridges feel like, well, I'm kind of one level up because LaMelo is playing 30 games a year, right? So he's getting more touches, PRs going up just because the other alpha isn't really in the room. And the same thing, Brandon Miller went down. So Miles Bridges looks around and is like, oh, well, it's my show. So, what else is he supposed to do if there's not even another capable guy to score on the roster? Trey Mann went out earlier in the year, and he was playing really well for them kind of off the bench as well. So to me, that's where Charlotte cannot be fooled. Like, I think they know enough to know exactly who they have on the roster. But I don't know if you're trying to indicate that they should actually move off of LaMelo Ball for sure. Ship him somewhere else.
Shaw, not to interrupt, but it looks like the Utah Jazz went ahead and they pulled the ace out their sleeve. They picked up Ace Bailey.
Well, I like that for sure.
What's your instant reaction to that?
Utah is in the talent acquisition phase. They said, you know what? Issues be damned. We need, more upside on this roster. And I think, there's nobody on the Utah Jazz team that you feel like, oh no, we can't do this or we can't do that. I think right now, we know they've shopped and will potentially continue to shop Markkanen. I don't know if Bailey's going to be the guy who they ultimately decide to build around, but they've shopped Walker Kessler as well too. John Collins just opted into his extension today, or to his into his final year of his contract here today. I think this gives Utah a lot of potential upside, and they are hoping that the coaching musings of Will Hardy will be able to calm whatever issues Ace Bailey may have in terms of his head. But if you believe the rumors, in terms of like, well, he wanted to go to a situation where he can go and get minutes immediately. Well, look no further than the Utah Jazz, because who's really getting in his way there in Utah that you feel like, okay, there's no way Ace wouldn't get a chance to, to get 25 to 28 minutes, in his rookie season.
I'm just letting you know, I don't know if I like this move by the Utah Jazz. I feel like you're just, again, this is another play at grasping at straws. And I think maybe what it's also telling me as well too is that there is a very short shelf life for some of these other prospects that they've drafted over the last couple of years. I look at Keontae George, who is had somewhat of an up and down
George stock. That's all right.
Yeah.
You still believe in that?
Yeah. I'm just and again, my whole thing is it's not going to come down to how many more talented guys you're going to put out there that has quote unquote upside. It comes down to, what is the developmental aspect of it? Because you're actually playing in an area, you're playing in a system, you're playing in a market that I can just tell you, and this is just how it's been, right? Since the days of Stockton and Malone, there's not been much out there that is supplemental for a lot of these guys to grow and mature. A lot of those guys have come from certain programs and certain places and brought that to, say, the organization, to the Utah Jazz. So as much as I buy into the idea that Ace Bailey is a talented guy, right, we've said that for numerous people that have gone through the Utah Jazz organization, the Utah Jazz system, but there's only been a select few who have actually come out of it, and have shown a level of success that has, kind of been attached to the framework of the Utah Jazz and what they've been, and that's where my concern is, because a lot of it has been the knock on Ace Bailey is that the guy's decision-making process, and at times tends to kind of, the miscues of what he does can not just be a detriment to just himself, but also say to the team. So if he cleans that part of it up, then okay, the future is very bright. If not, we're looking at another project again, and they've been doing this now, whether it be free agency, through trade, and or through what they've drafted. They've been missing on this for quite some time. So it'll be interesting to see what the idea here is for a guy like Ace Bailey, because it's definitely available to him. He can certainly come in and instantly have an immediate impact. But
well, it sounds like you think they should have maybe drafted Trey Johnson instead, maybe a safer pick. But Ainge is a decent talent evaluator, I'd say, for the most part. He has, especially when it comes to maybe top 5 selections. He's missed in middle rounds and late round picks, but when it comes to top 5, top 10 picks, he's usually pretty good. So I think them taking a shot here, on Mr. Bailey, with nothing really that they need to clear space out for. I mean, he can play with Markkanen, or if they decide to move Markkanen on, then so be it. But Cody Williams, I don't think showed a whole lot in his rookie season that they got to feel like, okay, well, we can't bring in a guy like Ace Bailey. I think we're off, the Keontae George train kind of together. And hopefully at some point they finally move and trade Jordan Clarkson. His name is always in trade rumors for it seems like the last 25 years. Both Sexton and Clarkson should probably be off this roster here at this stage, unless you want to keep one to keep the air quote veteran presence around, especially if you feel Ace might be maybe a little bit, not necessarily of a knucklehead, but somebody who's just going to need that kind of within the locker room. Because I don't know much about Markkanen's kind of locker room presence to know if he's going to be that, hey, you know what, young fella, come over here and let me show you something. So they may want to keep one of those two, in tow. And that's probably Clarkson, maybe before Sexton. But I just don't know if there's a guy here that makes a lot of sense. But I like the pick for Utah taking a swing here. Trey Johnson would have been the safer pick, but I like them going with Ace Bailey.
Yeah, I listen, I don't have any argument with that, but is it Filipowski? Who is it? Kyle Filipowski? He, to me, I think is who you need to look for as far as with the front court potential and upside. And to me, I think he's someone that could actually be a presence that can help define. Unless, to your point, Ace Bailey instantly comes in there and starts showing you that. And then we start seeing a combination kind of similar to Darren Williams and Carlos Boozer. When they're in the heyday of that kind of combination, you could probably see that. If you don't see that from you just mentioned him, Markkanen. If you don't see that from Markkanen, but you could probably see that from Filipowski and also from Bailey. But Kessler and Markkanen are wild cards to me. They don't exude the kind of presence that I think the Utah Jazz are really looking for. So it'll be interesting to see, again, to your point, Danny Ainge, great at the talent evaluation, but the other things that I still think that are lacking is surrounding the development of what his expectations are for the people that he is drafting, the talent that he is drafting for that organization.
All right, well, let's take a quick break here, man. We've been chomping at the bit. Thanks for everybody who's been tapping in here with us as well, too. So hear a little bit more from some of our 19 folks here, and we'll be right back here with the next selection shortly.
I am the Mojo King. He is the great Willie Freeman, and together we are Hip Hop Hidden Gems.
Hip Hop Hidden Gems is a podcast where we celebrate the golden age of hip hop and take a deep dive into artists you probably know and love, but focus on songs you might not be as familiar with. We analyze the gems from two unique perspectives. Sometimes we'll focus on a single verse, other times an entire song. Past episodes include Gangstar, Chino XL, Digital Underground, Scarface, and Big Daddy Kane.
So if you're a hip hop head or just love listening to two brilliant minds, check out Hip Hop Hidden Gems. We're on Apple, Spotify, Google, and any platform you choose.
Perfect.
Welcome everybody to another episode of Heavy in the Paint. Gerald Brown and the big man, Mr. Rick Mahorn. Next guest right now. It's an honor and a privilege. He's a gentleman. He's my brother. He's a former NBA player. Owns a Super Bowl championship. One of the greatest point guards to ever play in the NBA. Lyricist, icon. B.J. Armstrong. Kato June joining me. Kenny Anderson. Pete Rock himself. Stazu joining me. Mr. Penny Hardaway. The legendary Mr. Charles O.
MJ, Reggie Miller, Brad, the guys I went to war with had my back more than my teammates.
Hip-hop has been through so much ups and downs, you know what I'm saying?
Next face of the NBA gonna be, because right now, whether you love it or hate, there's still LeBron James.
They don't get it done for a number of reasons. I mean, it just happens. That's why you gotta love the NFL.
All right, you were Big Ten Player of the Year. But if you couldn't hold that, all the other stuff didn't matter. So
really ever fully officially retired. I think I just walked away from the game. That was it.
Make sure you hit the subscribe button. Heavy in the Paint.
We're back, Cal Lee Warrenshaw, Baseline NBA podcast, and Washington Wizards. It's time for them to get their own ice tray, and their selection is Trey Johnson from out of Texas. What do we make about this selection for the Washington Wizards, Shaw?
Well, the Wizards get to infuse some youth after adding all these veterans. They make a trade, was it yesterday, adding CJ McCollum and Kelly Olynyk, shipping out Jordan Poole and Saddiq Bey. So I've seen a lot of memes on social media talking about, the Wizards ain't even really trying to do nothing with all these old guys. They showed Malcolm Brogdon, Marcus Smart, Chris Middleton, CJ McCollum, and Kelly Olynyk. Now they get Trey Johnson, who is truly a really great bucket getter, good scorer, great attitude. Is going to be able to provide balance here now alongside Sarr, and the other rookies other young talent on this roster. I think this is the right move based on who's available for Washington. Makes a lot of sense for them here now to start building and replenish that young talent.
Yeah, look, I don't have a problem with this. It's a solid selection. A guy that can go out there, he can score the basketball, no question. But again, it still kind of begs to question. To me, it still raises even more questions about the Washington Wizards, because while getting a guy like CJ McCollum, I think is solid. He's a solid veteran guy. He's a professional. He's going to instantly have an impact for whatever that roster looks like. Kelly Olynyk, same way. Guy's a bulldog. He's a veteran. That's certainly helpful. But help these guys to do what? I just lend myself to the idea that they've already been through the ringer, so to speak. They've gone international. They've gone stateside with some of these players that they currently have, the Carringtons. It's at some point it has to play out. Like at some point, one or two of these young guys have actually got to come out looking like there is a bright star ahead, or future ahead, excuse me, for the Washington Wizards. So while I love the idea of them going after Trey Johnson, the thing that I fear more than anything is that whatever you're surrounding these new talented players, these uprising players with, are they actually coming in to help elevate them? Or are they going to, again, be left to figure it out on their own devices, which has always been a bad thing for anyone who's been perceived as a star player, under the Washington Wizards organization?
Well, I think the thing in today's game is really about, can you get talent, can you get assets, or can you get expirings? And that's what Washington did. They didn't want to be in the Jordan Poole business for longer than the 2 years that they were. It was a failed experiment. It didn't work. So they get off Poole. They bring in McCollum, who's an expiring. So again, the notion of whether he and Middleton and or Marcus Smart all stay here for the course of the regular season, that is to be determined. But they should be flippable because of the expiring aspects of their deals. That will allow them to maybe pick up another couple of draft picks, second round or otherwise, but they can get off that money or utilize McCollum in a way that can be a veteran presence to Carrington and now to Trey Johnson. I think it makes sense, to try to infuse some of this youth, but with not too much old. And I don't know. And I can almost say, rest assuredly, I'm not in the Washington organization, but there's no way Middleton, Smart, Brogdon, CJ McCollum, and Olynyk all finish the season as Washington Wizards. I guarantee those guys get moved either just because they want to give those veteran guys opportunities to go somewhere and win, and or try to get some other assets for them, within that situation. So that's where I think Washington will try to marry both young and old this season, at least for a little while. But I think this is a nice spot for Trey Johnson to go out here and try to cook a little bit this upcoming season.
Yeah, listen, I agree with you. I think it will be interesting to me is, will Marcus Smart still be there? In other words, do we see Trey being a 2, or is he going to be coming in and they see his, potentially being, the all-around point guard / shooting guard / scoring guard, right? Like, you've got Sarr, you've got a couple of other guys and stuff like that. And I think that to me is partly is where the Washington Wizards have missed out on. They've had some solid players up and down through the ranks. What they've not had is a solid point guard. And maybe they perceived that Jordan Poole was supposed to come in and kind of do all that. We knew that wasn't going to be the case. Even when he played with the Golden State Warriors, he didn't learn anything from Steph Curry because that was never his style of basketball. It was never his style of play, which is exactly the reason why Steph Curry did not cry when the Warriors decided to ship him off, right? So my whole question again comes down to, for the Washington Wizards, you can continue to accumulate all of this talent, but if they're not coming in to help accentuate what has been sorely lacking since John Wall, for Christ's sake, that all of that talent that you've got right there then still becomes expendable because those guys don't seem to know how to do it on their own. You know what I'm saying? Without having someone to really help guide the ship. And the best possible person that you have on your roster that can probably do that is a guy like Marcus Smart. Not saying that he should be a point guard, but he's been a point guard project for as many teams as you can think of, but he is definitely a culture changer, which I think can also help the Washington Wizards as well, too.
Well, I mean, I think that's where maybe Carrington kind of steps into this role. Do they give him more reps at that number one guard slot as well, too? Do they, I guess Brogdon is actually a free agent, so maybe he won't even be here anyway, but, you can kind of work your way into that. I don't think you want to just turn the keys over to Trey because to me, he slots more as a 2 who can pass as more than a 1 like Jordan Poole. I think Jordan Poole was more of a 2 who I guess in theory could pass, but wasn't really amazing at it. I don't think they want to make the same mistake here and allow Johnson to be set up appropriately, but then to do some creation, secondarily as Washington tries to figure out who it is. Like I said, they're not playing for this year. They're playing for future years and to potentially be a big player in next year's free agent class when all this money is going to be coming off their books. They're setting up themselves really, really nicely fiscally after years of kind of, of inequity, with their player asset management and their books not really being that clear.
Absolutely. You're tuned to The Baseline. Callie, Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Our live NBA Draft Watchparty. And now the New Orleans Pelicans have made their selection, the number 7 pick, Jeremiah Fears from out of the University of Oklahoma. Jeremiah Fears, you know, a lot of good things have been said, you know, about what he could potentially do. Didn't in most draft boards didn't have him like high, you know, in there, but there was definitely talks about him probably sneaking in and surprising people because apparently he had some really solid workouts. And so apparently the New Orleans Pelicans believed in his abilities, and he is now officially a Pelican.
Yeah, I think interesting selection, maybe our first reach, you know, of the draft. You know, I think everybody who's been picked thus far, at least, was still projected to be within the top 10 in some capacity. You know, I saw Fears as low as like 25. You know, I'm looking at something right now where I had him at 20. So Joe Dumars, the new, you know, general manager in New Orleans, obviously sees something here. After, again, we just got done talking about New Orleans making some moves and shifting around. So they bring in Jordan Poole and Saddiq Bey, who Saddiq Bey missed all of last year, basically. Remember, DeJounte Murray got hurt, and you know, I presumably will be back. I think, you know, maybe in November, December. I don't know if he'll be back from the beginning of the season. But Fears now comes in as a guy who can learn behind Murray potentially at that lead guard spot. They still have Jordan Hawkins too, who's probably still more of a 2 than a 3. I know he played, than a 1. I know Hawkins played some 1 at UConn, you know, before entering the league. But Fears, Joe Dumars must know something we do not. And then a lot of other draft people did not as well too. I think
are the Pelicans? Let me ask you, Shaw, and I don't, you know, I understand if you probably don't know this offhand. Are the Pelicans moving off from Alvarado?
Alvarado is still on the roster, as far as I know. I don't think he's an expiring or he's not a free agent that I'm aware of. But
I'd be very interested to see, you know, what happens here, because I'm not saying that, you know, Alvarado is a fan favorite, right? And I know, you know, Joe Dumars is all about, again, he's the kind of guy that likes building from within and keeping people who have been a part of the ups and downs, you know, of a franchise and a culture. But I look at a guy like Fears, there's a lot more upside, much bigger guard. And so there's going to be minutes to be fought. So it'll be interesting to see, you know, how Dumars and Willie Green collaborate on how this roster really does need to kind of round out into form. Because, again, there are minutes there, right? Like that he's going to have to take. You can't draft a kid like this, even to say as a reach, and not assume that what he brings to the table can instantly be an asset for what the Pelicans sorely lacked from a bench position. Because even when Alvarado, for example, was out on the floor, as good as a guy as he was, as solid as a defender, sneaky and everything like that, he's a size problem. And so you're getting a guy like this because you believe that he can actually augment a little bit of that in those matchup situations once Murray comes off the floor. So it'll be interesting to see what they do as far as roster goes. But
yeah, Alvarado has 2 years left.
Watch that space.
Alvarado 2 years left on his deal. So, you know, I think there's some depth things here that they want, or they don't know if DeJounte is going to be back and healthy right away. So they're going to try to, you know, shore that up. Some rumors that, and I mean, these are wild rumors that Joe D still might be looking to move Zion anyway. And maybe that's not that wild, but I think I've seen Herb Jones's name, you know, and Trey Murphy's name potentially ventured about, but Joe D coming here and truly reset this roster. And if he did, I don't know that this is the pick to kind of start the franchise with. So I would imagine that a good majority of who we currently see on this New Orleans roster is who's going to be there, especially after the move of McCollum and Olynyk, you know, yesterday. But I can't see them moving off of Trey Murphy or Herb Jones. I think those are guys who they want to build around. But the Zion thing is still very much up in the air. But I think, you know, Fears being added to this team with DeJounte and Alvarado is a peculiar situation. So maybe there are more moves to come from Joe Dumars here and the new leadership within the New Orleans Pelicans organization and franchise.
Absolutely. Callie Warrenshaw, Baseline NBA Podcast, our 21st ever NBA Draft Watch Party. Right now, the Brooklyn Nets are on the clock, and while they're getting ready to make that decision, I want to highlight something, Shaw, that you had said a little bit earlier before, you know, regarding the play for most of these teams. It's you know, either you're accumulating assets and talent or you're accumulating expired contracts. or expired salaries. And listen, there are a lot of teams, Shaw, that are part of this lottery that in my head, I'm saying to myself, you know, how much longer can you continue to keep pushing, you know, the ball forward? How many more years are you going to continue, you know, to find these really unique ways of trying to kind of put together a solid roster? I just think sometimes, and maybe it sounds, you know, cliched and simplistic, it starts with one. And at some point, some of these teams, and we're even talking about it right now, let's say with the Brooklyn Nets and who they select, there's got to be a guy that you're going to basically hang your hat on and say, this guy, it's not about being the future of the franchise, but it's about understanding what the franchise future could look like with him in it. And maybe changing the scope of how you do that is the way you go about drafting, how you go about drafting your players in the assessment, rather than falling, you know, for the okie doke, so to speak, because you're in the lottery and therefore you have to hit on the lottery picks. I think that's always tends to be the problem with some of these nuanced franchises that just don't seem to hit right on their draft selections because they believe it's got to be a one and done thing for them, rather than an accumulation of those picks between the first and the second rounds and building out from there.
I mean, roster construction is a tricky thing, but I've been listening to a lot of different things and reading some other articles, and you just realize, kind of to your point, sometimes the decision you make for today is even a better decision for tomorrow, right? And I'll take a random situation, not necessarily from a draft standpoint, but from a free agency standpoint. Remember when the Denver Nuggets won the NBA championship? Bruce Brown played a key role in the Nuggets winning the championship. He was owed, or felt like, hey, I'm due for a raise because I helped win this team win a chip, right? The Pacers say, well, we got cap space. We'll sign Bruce Brown. And it was like, all right, well, who's going to pay this guy $20 million? But they did. I guess it was technically $60 million, right? I think it was 3 years, 60. And it's like, maybe it's a little bit of an overpay. But ultimately, that moves started to set kind of a different culture for Indiana. And then Bruce Brown ended up being a central piece in getting them Pascal Siakam. And so I think my point of telling you that is like exactly what you're saying. Like, you just need to get the right cultural fit. Sometimes it might be from a fiscal standpoint, but sometimes it might be just from a player personnel standpoint in terms of the mindset of the organization. But even if you don't end up with that person or player 5-10 years down the line, maybe it's the move for the next move. And I think that's why you can't really take things for granted with whatever assets and picks you have, because you're just trying to make the most of that. So if you go here and draft somebody, like going back here, I'm not saying Fears is going to be a bust, but if Joe D sees something and ends up being wrong when everybody else is like, yeah, I wouldn't have taken him this high, then now is that somebody who can eventually move off of, you know, just because you might have mistake, or maybe you got lucky. Remember the Chandler Parsons deals, you know, second round guy in Houston, you know, and Daryl Morey was like, yeah. And now Chandler Parsons wanted all this money. And he was like, well, I was the guy to find Chandler Parsons. I'll never forget that he said that. I want to be the guy who finds Chandler Parsons, but I'm not the one who wants to overpay Chandler Parsons. It's not a knock against Chandler Parsons because he obviously injuries derailed his career. But Morey ended up being right. And I think that's what we're just trying to do. You always want to do the most with whatever information you have and the picks and assets that you have at this time.
Absolutely. And so just as it was announced, the Brooklyn Nets have selected Igor Deminin from BYU, freshman guard, 6'8", has a 6'10", like wingspan, wiry kind of guy. The word on him is that this guy has a great feel for the game, good off the ball defense, can be a floor general. Where are we on this one? Again, you know, this guy was probably the highest I think that they said can maybe break 12 or 13. But like the Ringer had him, you know, designated somewhere around 16th, you know, on their mock draft. So what do we make about this selection for the Brooklyn Nets?
I mean, Brooklyn has picks upon picks here in this first round. So I don't want to pass too much judgment or even give too much analysis on what they're doing, because this could be a pick for somebody else. I think it's do they have 4 picks within the first round? Something like that? Is it 4 or 5 picks? So it's just like, who knows what they're actually doing here? 8, 19, 26, and 27. So 4 picks. Sure. Igor, you might be a Brooklyn Net, you might not. But a move like this could potentially signify, maybe the Cam Johnson days are over, or the Cam Thomas days are over. Johnson is somebody who has a lot of value and a lot of interest from
or either, right? Or either.
Yeah, or either. And I think
it may actually come out. It may actually be the camshaft. It's just.
So I would be really interested to kind of see what Brooklyn does the rest of this draft. But similarly, again, maybe it's a little bit of a reach here, but maybe somebody else between 8 and wherever the teens somewhere to speak had their eye on him, and Brooklyn is trying to maybe will and deal here a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Callie Warrenshaw, Baseline NBA podcast, and our coveted NBA Draft Watch Party. So now the Toronto Raptors are on the clock, and while we're waiting for that to take place, Shaw, I want to kind of harp on a couple of the things that have been going on so far in the NBA. And, we talked about it a little bit earlier with regards to Desmond Bane being moved to the Orlando Magic. I think we had alluded to the fact that if you're the Orlando Magic, this is, I guess in their eyes, this is that piece, right? Like he is that guy that essentially may help them crack the elusive first round playoff woes that they've suffered over the last couple of seasons. But I also think as well, too, that a guy like Desmond Bane, coupled with Banchero and coupled with the Wagner brothers, I think it just may hit differently with regards to the dynamic and the look and the feel of what the Orlando Magic might want to be doing, might be the actual correct balance of both offense to couple with what they've been bringing over the last couple of years defensively. And I just wanted to get your thoughts about that one, because while, I was okay about them getting KCP. I mean, you got him basically, on the cheap, but I just felt like you got him on the back end of his career of what he could give you and what he actually gave the Denver Nuggets. Yeah. But I think getting a guy like Desmond Bane, who relatively probably one of the more stronger two guards that's out there, legitimately can score the basketball. But what I love about him as well, too, is he doesn't have to score the basketball. Like, he does not have to be the guy. But I think he can grow into assuming certain roles that the Orlando Magic were sorely lacking, and helping to take the pressure off of Banchero and Wagner to be those guys is having a veteran guy that can shoot the basketball, can maybe even help close out some basketball games with a guy like Desmond Bane.
Yeah, I think Orlando was really smart, maybe a little bit an overpay by some people's accounts, but why not go for it? Like, what are you doing with all of these picks in the future, especially when you have these young guys and Banchero and Wagner? And we saw them dribble the hell out of the basketball, with just kind of nowhere to go and nobody to kick out to. And while KCP tried his best, and I wouldn't say he was terrible, but it just wasn't as impactful as Orlando wanted it to be and needed it to be, for long-term viability and success. Orlando's season was derailed by injury. And I think we can't talk about that talk about this team without acknowledging that. But assuming health, Suggs gets back into the fold here, will presumably take lead guard duties. Bane is another guy who can secondary play create, average about 3-4 assists as well. That is such a great relief for Wagner, and Banchero to have somebody else out there, both reliable in terms of like when they're dribbling the ball and then they get doubled or trapped, they can kick out to somebody who is going to be a knockdown threat from three, but also somebody who can even set them up, I think, at times too, with secondary play creation when he's out on the wing, or if he's going to take the ball off the bounce and dribble to the basket. I can just see him kicking out to a Wagner or to a cutting Banchero and getting Orlando some very, very much needed offense. It cost them, Cole Anthony and KCP and a crap ton of picks that end up going to Memphis. But I think it was a smart move by Orlando to gamble on this. And that was before they knew, Halliburton was going to be out and the Pacers would presumably not be at the peak of their powers next year. The East is wide open, and Orlando is poised to strike to make a serious run into the top four.
Absolutely. And listen, also couple that with what you saw with the Boston Celtics, right? It wasn't as if the Orlando Magic didn't legitimately position themselves. And let's remember, too, last season, they were struggling. They weren't struggling because they couldn't win basketball games. They were struggling because they couldn't keep a roster together because of all the injuries they suffered. Now, if they're on the other side of it, and some of those teams that they had a difficulty leapfrogging suddenly now are the ones that have to nurse their wounds, the Orlando Magic might actually be poised to essentially come out as a top 3 seeded team. And that's just off of what they currently had on their roster before they made the play for Desmond Bane. So I don't necessarily mind it as far as overpaying. I think people get a little too caught up in the moment about the overpaying aspect of it. And when you look at what happened with the New York Knicks, I know that people can sit there and, poo-poo what they gave up. Yeah, our man Jabari, coming in saying Jabari things, but they can poo-poo what took place here with the New York Knicks. I will say this: if next season, the New York Knicks wind up right back in the same position, and you just even get a how do I put it, a even more reasonably consistent showing of the potential of Mikal Bridges, of what he can help for this basketball team, whether it be defensively or even he finds his offensive game. Ain't nobody going to be complaining about the picks that the New York Knicks gave up, because, again, they are still in this window where they can actually get themselves to an Eastern Conference Finals and ultimately to an NBA Finals. It only becomes a problem if a guy like Mikal Bridges fails on being or living up to what the Knicks gave up for. I don't even think you have to worry about that with a guy like Desmond Bane, because Desmond Bane has proven time and time again that when given the opportunity, he actually is a good, solid type of player, which is all that you need for the Orlando Magic, because you already got your core pieces in place to begin with.
All right, well, I will come back to that point. And our guy P Money, and I don't know if you're talking about the Toronto pick P Money, but I 1000% agree with you. I do not understand. And, we like Masai here on our podcast. Here about Colin Murray Boyles.
Should I mess around and call him Urigi?
That guy's
Should I call him?
You gotta let that
Okay.
go. That's years past. That's like 7 years ago.
Was that a Ujiri move?
But Murray comes in here and like this is who? What was it? John Hammond? I'm forgetting who the former Bucks general manager was. Somebody Hammond, right? But he kept like drafting like these long rangey guys.
Reggie Hammond?
No, not at all.
Okay.
But I think to get Murray Boyles here in this space, great point. Why are you getting Scotty Barnes 2.0? The Ringer's even saying this is going to draw maybe Draymond Green comparisons. The Toronto Raptors team is not a roster that needs less floor spacing, more big bodies or whatever, who can kind of are limited to kind of one situation. Why you don't go out here and try to shore up your play creation, and maybe you can say at the size that he can do maybe a little play creation, because Draymond obviously does play create, and obviously does Scotty Barnes as well too. But to me, to shore up things behind quickly, and or Grady Dick or RJ Barrett would have made a little bit more sense. And I don't know if they're long for Jakob Poeltl on this roster as well too. Chris Boucher is a free agent, so do you want somebody at the center spot here to kind of back up Poeltl? I don't know. I don't really love this pick for Toronto, but I'm not trying to question Masai, and I know they're said to be trying to be big players, in free agency and potentially within the trade market. I'm a little surprised we haven't had any trades, up to date right now. I'm trying to check my feeds and see if Shams is tweeting anything out.
Check your pulse, Shaw. Check your pulse. You'll be all right. You'll be okay.
But I don't like this move for Toronto. I'm kind of down on it, based on the player comps that are out there. I'm not saying this young man is a bad player. I just don't see it as a fit for this current Toronto roster construction currently.
I agree with you 150,000%. And I think it's interesting, given that a ton of guards, with the exception of Cooper Flagg, were selected in the draft. And I say that because they're being labeled as guards, but their size and their wingspan have them playing multiple roles. I'm having a hard time looking at, if you're the Toronto Raptors, not that you're trying to follow suit, but I'm just having a hard time figuring out what role delineation can you actually get from a guy who, to me, seems like he's gonna need a lot of work. He's gonna need a lot of seasoning, and whether you go one way or the other with it, I don't see where the versatility is gonna lend well for what the Toronto Raptors could have had access to. There are a ton of other players that I think that they could have leaned in. Even if you're trying to overload in a position, they could have overloaded with far more talented players, so to speak, in that regard, given the circumstances and the division that they're in, right? With the exception of the Brooklyn Nets, Shaw, it's not as if the Toronto Raptors still can't hit on certain things. For the struggles were real, but they were still a competitive basketball team. They lost a lot of close games, through certain courses. And then, clearly when they started suffering the injuries that they suffered, then they started getting blown out of the water. But I just think that this was just a miss. Just
I
a
would
miss
have liked, maybe a Carter Bryant here for them and or the Duke center. Come on. I think maybe one of those two guys might have made a little bit more sense for them. But, Toronto is they clearly have an idea of what they want to do here. And so I will see if this roster stays as currently constructed. And I think when we see peculiar moves, it just makes you wonder, okay, maybe something else is kind of brewing. But this just seems to be more the same for the Raptors, which I don't understand why they'd want that. But, rock out, Masai, rock out.
Cali Warren Sharp Baseline NBA podcast, and this is our inaugural 2025 NBA Draft Party, hosted and graciously curated by our people's millions.co. So if you're catching us on the Millions piece, I'm sure you're already, rocking with us and you love the decor, what I'm saying, through the Million site. If you're rocking with us through the YouTube channel, this is where we hang our hat. This is where we lay. If you are catching us through the 19 Media Group family, you know what I'm saying? We extend and always give love, through all of the great family of content creators that are part of the 19 Media Group family. So yeah, man, we got a host of different stuff to still get into as we continue to kind of watch and be in awe, in the shock and awe value of the 2025 NBA draft.
Sounds like you're queuing me up for a break. We taking a break?
Yeah, I think we are taking a break, and when we come back, we will find out who the Houston Rockets are going to select. And I think we have a little bit of a topic of conversation to discuss regarding the Houston Rockets, because they have the 10th pick, and therefore it means we got to talk about that trade.
All right, let's hit it.
What's good? This is Warren Shaw, and you are watching clips from my podcast, Dope Interviews, brought to you by the Mighty 19 Media Group. As a viewer or listener, you'll be connected with the creators, business executives, and players from the worlds of sports, entertainment, and the corporate environment. Each episode provides insights from the guest expertise, making each dope interview a unique experience. Take the journey with me. You will not be disappointed. That's Dope Interviews with Warren Shaw, available on YouTube and all podcast outlets, brought to you by the Mighty 19 Media Group.
And we're back, and the pick is already in from the Houston Rockets, and they do select the Duke center. I am not going to try to butcher this young man's last name. I do not follow it close enough, but I'm going to call him Come On. And hopefully that's right on his first name. But what I've seen, look at you. Listen, you're struggling with Knipple, brother. So let's settle down.
Okay.
let's settle down. But ultimately, I like this pick for Houston. It's a kind of a third center here. Obviously, Şengün, and they re-signed Adams not too long ago. So you'd bring him in here now to kind of learn behind those two young guys, and then allows Adams maybe to kind of save himself a little bit as he's a little bit longer in the tooth. Gives them a roll threat, a lob threat as well too. That's not something I think Adams and or Şengün really provide. So, with the addition of Kevin Durant here now too, the defense is something that Ime Udoka really, really loves. And this is something now I think the Rockets can continue to hang their hat on, and they can play really big across their front line, with the addition of this young man on their roster.
So let me just ask you this question real quick, Shaw, because then it leads into us having this conversation about the big trade with Kevin Durant going to the Houston Rockets. Wasn't this pick supposed to go to Phoenix?
You're right. Wait, is that right? Yes, 10 pick is like transferred over to Phoenix. I'm still looking at the actual telecast. So yes, this pick does go to the Phoenix Suns. They are basically centralists. So he goes in here and actually makes an opportunity here to really make some sense there, alongside Devin Booker and company, because we don't know what the future of this roster is with Jalen Green and Dylan Brooks. If both of those guys will stay there, we know they're trying to move this guy on here. Thank you there, Jabari, for the pronunciation watch as well too.
Absolutely. So listen, let's talk about this, Shaw, right? Like, the Houston Rockets had this 10th pick. They obviously make a big play. They move to get Kevin Durant in exchange for Jalen Green, who was going to the Phoenix Suns, Dylan Brooks. They gave up this 10th pick So now the Phoenix Suns now have themselves a project big who I think is going to instantly come in. If he's as reliable and as versatile as what he is capable of, I can definitely see him probably taking some of those Nick Richards minutes. And I know that Nick Richards was moved over to Phoenix, in a deal this past season, but Nick Richards, Shaw, you mentioned it. He has a problem with staying on the court. So I think this definitely deepens the bench. I think this allows them to not put Nick Richards out there, but they still have a lot of upside with a guy like him. And if Devin Booker moves back to that point guard position, hybrid point guard, shooting guard like kind of position, I know they had Tyus Jones, but if he's going to be more the primary ball handler, he can work well with a big like Common.
Yeah, it makes sense for where Phoenix seems to be trying to go, trying to replenish just assets. I don't know if most people would say that this is the best player available at this stage, but it does fit a need for them, and allows them some viability, and gives them some defensive prowess too that they didn't really have. I think in the way they weren't as bad as I thought they were going to be defensively last year, but this is a guy who can definitely deter some shots in what I think is going to be a pretty generous, backcourt, letting guys kind of get to the rim. So, shout out to our guy here. Come on. Hopefully his tenure in Phoenix is not a short leprechaun one.
Yeah. Thanks, Jabari. I appreciate, listen, I wasn't too far off of butchering it. Listen, I said Maluka, but it's Maluach, right? Maluach. Well, I think that No. I don't think it's watch. I think it's walk. Not like it.
It literally is spelled out watch in our comments.
Well, he has it spelled out that way, but I believe, because you got to add that African zing to it. We need to get our man Godfrey on here and have him help us make sure that we properly enunciate.
Chaos.
Okay. Chaos. Anyway, with that being said, Shaw, let's shift the focus now about the Houston Rockets, right? So this pick goes over to the Phoenix Suns because the Houston Rockets push their chips all in, right? They AEW, shout out to Gimmick Infringement. They AEW all in. This is their opportunity. They get a guy like Kevin Durant. What are your thoughts or your sentiments on this type of deal? And did the Houston Rockets ultimately give up too much for the caliber of a guy like Kevin Durant?
Nope. Not at all. Not for where they are and where they think they can go relatively quickly. It's different. Like I said, we talked about Kevin Durant in San Antonio made no real sense. San Antonio is not that close. I think Houston, obviously being the number 2 seed this past year, Udoka has proven himself to be an outstanding coach. Whatever you think of his off the court antics, be damned. He's an amazing individual when it comes to the gathering and galvanizing a locker room and getting guys to be able to buy in. So you bring KD into that situation, somebody who is truly the adult in the room when they need to be able to score. I think Jalen Green was just miscast as somebody who wasn't really ready for those big moments, especially in a Game 7. And while I like Fred VanVleet, I respect him and I respect his journey. I just don't think he can be your lead guy trying to get buckets, in a way that is probably necessary. Now, when he's playing off of somebody who has the gravity of Kevin Durant, I think you're cooking with gas in that situation. So Durant adds so much to them from just being somebody who can handle the pressures of the playoffs, the offensive load that will come kind of in tight moments, while making Şengün and VanVleet, and the big thing here, allowing more opportunity for Amen Thompson to really, really be able to grow in starters minutes and all the reps that he's going to need. I'm salivating at the notion of Amen practicing with Kevin Durant every single day, learning that aspect. And while I don't think Durant has always been cast as the greatest leader in the locker room type of situation, he has a really good rapport with players in general. And I think Amen can learn a lot just by watching his work ethic and maybe pick up a couple of footwork and other tips from Kevin Durant, release points, all of those things. I think this Rockets team made the right move here. They did not give up too much. Brooks, Green, and the number 10 pick for KD for where they are right now. That's a stamp of approval for me.
It's a stamp of approval. They also gave up 5 second-round picks as well too. I think I want to look at it from 2 different perspectives, and I know that do we have another pick that's already come in?
Yeah, no. Cedric Howard is now
with the Portland Trailblazers. And given what the Portland Trailblazers have recently done in getting Jrue Holiday, they moved Anthony Simons to the Boston Celtics. I think that this, it's a pretty solid pick. Again, Blazers are going youth, kind of slightly hitting that restart button, so to speak. So I have no problems with Portland, going that way if they believe that, this kid has upside and complement and as being a complementary player with the potential to do, great things. I think at some point, though, I would like to see the Portland Trailblazers either move in or move on from some of the players that have been over there over the last couple of years that Billups has been struggling to kind of rotate in and out of the rosters with. But, you certainly want to start seeing a little bit more athleticism and consistency, from the guys that he's, from the guys that the Portland Trailblazers have been accumulating. So,
yeah, it's a peculiar move, not necessarily. Maybe I shouldn't say that. It's not peculiar. They have a lot of young guys and maybe some kind of duplicitous players here. So I think the acquisition of Jrue Holiday is meant to, again, provide another veteran presence, a championship presence, within that locker room. But I don't know if this guy's going to come in here and is he going to be duplicitous in some ways of what Shaedon Sharpe kind of already does, who they obviously clearly need to kind of continue to kind of get loose. Scoot is probably happy Simons is gone as an opportunity now to really.
Oh, wait, I think Howard is going to get moved to the Memphis Grizzlies.
All right. Well, you're watching things in real time. So Memphis, if that's really the case, and that makes maybe some sense for them as well, too.
Okay.
If that's where he's going to stay, where are you seeing that currently?
The ESPN said proposed trade to Memphis. So
right. For what? What do we got?
Oh, no, I didn't have the info from what. I think we have to go back to if this was part of the move from Bane. Could have been
number 16. Well, there's another trade here happening in real time. Cedric Howard at number 11 is going to Memphis, and the Grizzlies are sending number 16 and a 2028 first round pick to Orlando to Portland for Cedric as well.
Okay, so this is a trade in process, as in it wasn't from something that came from. Okay, that makes sense.
All right, so Cedric Howard to Memphis.
Okay. All right. So let me quickly pivot back to what we were talking about with Kevin Durant going to the Houston Rockets and him being the perfect fit. I think, to me, Shaw, what I'd be looking at from this perspective is this fits more strategically than it just does about assuming that what the Houston Rockets need is that one piece to put them over the top. I think this is one of those rare opportunities where these kind of things kind of blend in at the right time, where it's more than just assuming that when you're bringing a guy like Kevin Durant in there, that, he's the one that's going to put you over the top. What I really think that it comes down to is Kevin Durant and Ime Udoka and what the Houston Rockets need to help accentuate what they're trying to do collectively as a team that they weren't getting from a couple of the players that they were hoping can kind of fit and blend in and do so. I think it puts everybody now back to where they need to be. Like Fred VanVleet, he can really be a good floor general. He doesn't have to be the guy that has to score the basketball, but he can be a great secondary guy and have those moments without the pressure of saying he needs to have those moments, right? Like, I think that's been part of his story, to your point. It's been a great story. He proved it when he was a Toronto Raptor. And I think it's been hard for him to be able to reprove that because of the dynamic of what the Houston Rockets were and what kind of roster construction they've had. Now you've got some guys out there where Kevin Durant can sort of basketball with brutal efficiency. That actually gives more opportunity for guys like Sengun and guys like Thompson, who are still raw in their ability to score. They'll still get more opportunities, but still be able to make an impact for the Houston Rockets in areas that they were lacking because they weren't getting the consistency from the same other playmakers that have now been kind of moved on from. Dylan Brooks, inconsistency to shoot the three, but he's a great defensive guy. Well, guess what? You've got Amin Thompson now. You ain't got to worry about that. You can get that same kind of inconsistency from Fred VanVleet. So again, I think it's a great move for the Houston Rockets because from a strategic standpoint, it resets the dynamic of where your guys are, and it takes the pressure off of everybody now only having to do what they can do. They can all kind of explore different ways of having an impact without compromising what got the Houston Rockets to be that number one seed this past season.
Yeah, we not to belabor the issue, but what it's going to do just not only for playing time, but I think just the the maturation of some of the younger guys. Obviously you talked about Amen, you talked about Şengün, but think about Torrey Eason, right?
Yeah.
Jabari Smith. Think about even Cam Whitmore, who is like, all right, they kind of oscillate him between the G League and obviously the large club, but will get some opportunities here now. Reed Shepherd will probably get some opportunities now. Like a lot of people were still coveting him as an elite level potential playmaker. Some people are saying he could have been the best prospect in last year's draft. Couldn't even get on the floor for Houston this past year now. So there's some role delineation that is going to now change and shift, but there's also some maturation and some learning that I think is going to happen with that team just by the addition of Kevin Durant, coming to the Houston Rockets.
Absolutely. You're tuned to the Baseline. Callie Warrenshaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. We'll be awaiting our pick from the Chicago Bulls. I believe that's going to be the number 12 pick. So, Shaw, why don't we jump into a quick little break here? You know what I'm saying? I'm sure we have got breaks galore. And on the flip side of it, we'll talk more picks and some other stuff that's been happening in the NBA.
You got it.
Remember that time you got credit carded by a shark?
How could I forget? That was an experience of a lifetime.
I'm Carmen.
I'm Jessica.
This is Small Town USA.
We're out to prove that bigger isn't always better. Small towns don't always get the credit that they're due. Their stories, the good, the bad, and the ugly, often go unheard.
Until now. We try to leave small towns in the same condition we found it, but sometimes it just doesn't work out. We've learned you have to shake them up in order to get all the secrets out.
Join us Tuesdays as we travel to these small in size but big in life towns across the U.S.
Yo, what's up? I'm Desmond, and I'm the host of Hip to the Games, a podcast from 19 Media Group, where the brilliance of basketball and hip-hop's past and present is genuinely appreciated. Join me every other Friday as we celebrate some of the greatest artists, albums, moments, songs, bars, punchlines, NBA teams, players, just anything and everything to do with the game of rap and the game of basketball. See, if you like basketball and hip-hop, that means you're hip to the games. But no matter where you fall on that spectrum, I encourage you to join the fun every other Friday on your favorite podcast platform, courtesy of the great 19 Media Group.
We're back. Callie Warrenshaw, Baseline NBA Podcast, NBA Watch Party style, through millions.co. Chicago Bulls have made their selection. They have decided to go international, and their selection is forward Noah Esenge. Thoughts, Mr. Shaw?
Atlanta's been active. There's a lot of activity today as well too. So Atlanta is now trading number 13 pick here too. So I'm getting all kind of like crosswires. I'm trying to kind of keep up here too. But I think, from the Chicago standpoint, getting some more talent within that front court. This is a roster that seems like it does need to reset. They moved off of Levine, they moved off of DeRozan, have some talent, I think, on the current roster, as currently constructed, especially with, Josh Giddey up for an extension, Bucelis, somebody who obviously they're going to try to build around. So they have their little European or kind of overseas connection here. So let's see what Noah is able to kind of do. If he comes over here right away and plays for the Chicago Bulls team. But this is a team that is clearly within flux. I don't think they have much of an identity currently right now. They were a nice story to close the year. Kobe White went crazy. My young son kind of doing his thing. Giddey really kind of found his footing a little bit too. But this is not a team that is, anything more than play-in bound right now. So they just need to continue to get talent, evaluate that talent, and ultimately reset their table. I would imagine that a Vucevic and or Lonzo Ball trade happens at some point. But, that's what the betting man would say. That doesn't necessarily mean what Chicago ultimately wants to do. So let's see what Noah ends up coming here to do here for the Chicago Bulls.
The thing that just kind of resonates with me, Shaw, is that so far, outside of Cooper Flagg, this draft selection has just gone all over the place. And, I'm sure it's even probably left some of the, analysts, the TV analysts, kind of like all right, where do we pivot? Like, what do we, you know what I'm saying? Because clearly what it's telling me is that they're no longer they're able to properly read the mind of the executive or read the room the same way as it always is. You know, whether or not some of these are prospects that are going to be hit or misses, or these are actually going to be instant plug in and play kind of players that are being designated. You know, we always talk about how at the end of this, we'll see who is left standing, right? Who still has longevity and teeth in this NBA league, because only so many of these guys are going to be able to come in and have an impact. A few of them are going to probably be caught up in the G League or wind up going off internationally. But this to me just kind of speaks more to how unpredictable this has been. You know what I'm saying? Like, the only thing that has been fired is that Cooper Flagg was going to get drafted, and everything else then becomes kind of like, well, what were the organization thinking? And unless it was based off of a trade, it's like hard to predict, like, you know, where guys are falling and what the needs are.
Well, I mean, I think the Dylan Harper pick was pretty solid and safe, you know, for San Antonio. They had no interest really even talking to anybody else anyway. So, but you can say the draft really did start at 3, and with the Sixers kind of going with Edgecombe there as opposed to anybody else added to their roster, then it maybe threw some things off into wax. I think Edgecombe was somebody who could have went anywhere between 3 and maybe 6 or even 7. So the Sixers kind of, not say flipped the draft, but it did definitely shifted the idea, I think, for some of these other teams here now. And now they're going by whatever their scouting and rosters are saying, hey, this is the best guy potentially available. But as you're alluding to here now, Atlanta is now, as I was saying right before we cut to this pick, Atlanta's trading out of this pick here at 13. This pick is going to go to New Orleans. New Orleans will swap 23 with Atlanta here. And so now Joe Dumars, in his first full season as the general manager of the New Orleans Pelicans, making 2 picks within the lottery. So that really makes me go back to the earlier pick, you know, when they jumped up, you know, to get Earl. Now, is that somebody who they're really trading? Or again, is he resetting the deck with what he thinks is top level talent from the New Orleans Pelicans?
Yeah, no, it's interesting that, you know, again, Joe Dumars is having an instant impact on stirring the pot, right? One of the most quiet giants in the game of basketball in what he did for the Detroit Pistons, but has never been quiet about the moves that he's made to helping the Detroit Pistons win 2 NBA titles, assemble probably one of the best well-rounded teams in our modern generation with those Detroit Piston basketball teams. And, you know, even though he's been much maligned, you know, post, you know, that window of dynasty that the Detroit Pistons have, he's still somebody that I think he knows how to construct without being, you know, flamboyant or boisterous with the kind of moves that have been made.
I mean, yeah, I mean, he's not somebody who's been quiet about, you know, what he thinks the league, how the league is and how players should, you know, behave themselves and so forth and so forth. So, you know, if one thing, if you're taking his playing career pedigree into account, he's going to draft guys who we feel are high character and who can matriculate and live within the city of New Orleans, which has a lot of distractions. Let's just call it that for now. So if he is trading in here for a second pick within the lottery, either he's trying to package this, or maybe there's other guys that are currently on the roster who are on the move, and he's just trying to talent accumulate to put the team in kind of his own image here now. So really interested to see what this pick is. You know, I think a guy like Carter Bryant might fit here for them. The young man from Illinois, I think, might work for them here as well too. So waiting to see what the New Orleans Pelicans do here with number 13.
And they go with Derek Queen, the center out of Maryland.
Okay. So with these kind of on the roster already, you know, I think it gives them just more front court help that they probably just feel like, hey, you know what? Let's give us as many bites as the apple as we possibly can. They moved off of Olynyk, who was more of a 4 and a 5, I guess, you know, a little bit of a spacer. But Queen can kind of come in here now and get minutes, I think, right away. I don't know, brother. As we're talking it out, I think New Orleans might be in for some semblance of a reset, but I don't know what that would mean for Trey Murphy and Herb Jones, or if they would like actually run offense through those guys. This is something I think we definitely need to watch here with what the New Orleans Pelicans are doing. I can't imagine that they're going to be done making moves here tonight by a long shot.
Yeah, I'll be interested to see, what else the New Orleans Pelicans are looking to, because then it might give us a clearer picture. But I think, Derek Queen is a solid pick. He had a solid run, with Maryland in his freshman year. So I can definitely see him, coming in and instantly bolstering that front court, which, again, regardless of whether or not Williamson is or isn't in the plans of the future, I think that there's something that they can get from his ability, from Queen's ability to come in and help this team.
Well, what is your thought? Because I hear a lot about Zion's best position is kind of like 0.5, right? Zion at the 5, and he's trying to be able to create. So do you subscribe to that model? And I guess just point blankly, and I'd ask our fans, anyone kind of tuning in, do you think Zion Williamson should be traded? Like, do you think he should be on the New Orleans Pelicans roster? But CL, your thought process, your thought on Zion as kind of like the offensive hub for the New Orleans Pelicans, especially with Ingram now traded and off the roster.
If you're not gonna invest, and again, it would surprise me, like this pick that they went with is, a front court player rather than going after a guard, right? So I think that
they drafted a guard, in the first pick.
Who was it they drafted again? I'm sorry. Who did they got?
The guy who went from basically 20 to 8.
Fears. Jeremiah Fears.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. But he's not being built out to be your guard, right? Like, we're gonna see, but like we were saying before, there's gonna be a lot of minutes here. Let's remember too, Dejounte Murray. As much as I like Dejounte Murray as Dejounte, I'm sorry, my apologies. Hey, this is just going to be the episode of we're just butchering names, okay? But for Murray, I've always seen him more as a 2 guard than a point guard, right? So I guess in a way, what it's telling me is either you're going to go with this experiment of Williamson being kind of the point forward or point center kind of guy, right? Which is hard to imagine that happening if you've got Murray on your roster. But if you're not, then it surprises me that you did decide to draft Queen and you're not looking at the plethora of other guards that are out there that you could see potentially being as a point guard of the future for you, unless you're trying to bring in, say, like another veteran to pair up with Murray and Williamson and say Queen and the other assets that you're planning to accumulate through, if you're not packaging them to like what you were saying a little bit earlier before. I don't like the idea of Williamson playing as a point center, point forward. I'm not really enamored with his style of play, so to speak, at that level, because whatever it is that he doesn't seem to have anything long lasting because he can't stay on the court. So now you're asking him to do a whole lot more with the basketball. It's just hard for me to see that with a guy like Williamson. Not that he can't be that. It's just I don't like him for the Pelicans for that. Like, I feel like they've tried that and they've tried that too hard.
All right. Well, I'm not a big fan of, trying to increase his PER and over his minutes. I think Zion is somebody you kind of have to put in bubble wrap. He can be obviously extremely impactful. And we do need to watch what New Orleans does here. Joe D coming in here swinging, like he's out here swinging. Again, 2 picks, made a trade yesterday. So we'll see if Zion is even long for the roster here. As the San Antonio Spurs now, as we switch gears, select Carter Bryant here now at the number 14 pick. Carter Bryant thinks he probably could have been picked somewhere within the top 10. So he slips maybe slightly, by most people's draft boards here. But I think Jabari in here talking mad stuff about Zion. But I think this is a smart and responsible pick by the San Antonio Spurs. Look at them basically taking the best player available here now to add to their what is a very, very budding and growing roster. I think this Spurs team is building things in the right way. It's awesome when you get lucky, you get a guy like Wemby to kind of come to join your team. But now you get another 3-and-D type guy here to add to the roster along with Vasil. You can move on from Keldon Johnson. They still have draft picks in the future that they still have from, God knows how many trades. This Spurs team is really, really poised to make a run. I think as soon as this year, well, I wouldn't say necessarily championship, but they're going to be heard from. And I like this pick here for Carter Bryant, especially with the outside scoring that he's going to bring to the San Antonio Spurs.
I love this pick for the Spurs. I think right now, before, we'll assume that, Dallas Mavericks getting Cooper Flag, clearly they could win the draft, so to speak. But I honestly think the San Antonio Spurs might wind up winning this draft. Like, both of these are solid selections for what they're constructing. I think that they got away with fire here because I actually, and I've seen Carter play. I actually had predicted him to probably move up a little bit. Like, I think he should have been like top 5 type of pick if we're seeing the kind of extreme fluctuation of those that were selected between him and where he got selected to right now. So the fact that he fell really, in my opinion, the Spurs lap, you've got Harper and him. Oh, I think it's on and popping in San Antonio. I think that the future is very bright with just these 2 selections already.
All right. Well, we need to go back here as before number 15 goes in, because it looks like we missed something, as we're, again, waxing poetically here. The Charlotte Hornets traded Mark Williams to the Phoenix Suns. So I'm not sure if I'm reading this right. So does it mean the Hornets have traded both their centers to the Phoenix Suns in the last 2 years? So in addition to what Phoenix drafted with number 10, with Kaman, now I'm a little bit more perplexed about what's happening because I did not see that come across my news feed earlier. But yes, the Hornets traded Mark Williams to the Phoenix Suns for the number 29 pick and a 2029 first round pick. Bobby Marks is adding on some more context, or I think, to this as well. First rounder is least favorable of Cleveland, Utah, and Minnesota, top 5 protected, sources say. So, Phoenix, what's good? Why are we just accumulating Charlotte Hornets centers? And now you've drafted. So scratch everything I said about the new regime and the general management in Phoenix. I have no idea what they're doing. No idea what's going on.
They were listening. They were reading Jabari's comments. Whispers, time to move on.
So what does this mean for Nick Richards, bro? And then you just got come on. So I don't know.
Well, you heard what I said. You heard what I said.
3 centers here who, in theory, all deserve opportunities to play. So I don't know if there's something else brewing here for Phoenix, that we're not sure about. But that is a very, very peculiar move for the Suns team. But I guess we shouldn't be surprised by anything what the Matt Ishbia group is doing. Because, wow.
Matt Ishbia is on some Matt-ism.
That's a shout out. Shout out to Channel I, bro.
Hip hop hidden gem. A hip hop hidden gem. Absolutely.
Real talk there. So even kind of like jumping back into this now. So, as we finish up the point on the New Orleans Pelicans, and now we wait, for the Oklahoma City Thunder, the world champion Oklahoma City Thunder, to try to figure out what they are going to add to this team. Not let us not forget, if you will, too, that their lottery pick last year did not play at all. So, that gentleman will come back. They get a number 15 pick here to potentially add in here. And then when you talk about trying to stay in front of the second apron, this is where I think OKC is best poised, because clearly they know how to draft and evaluate talent. Clearly. And so with all the young guys that are on this roster, even when they're going to have to pay J-Dub and they're going to have to pay Chet or whatever, then it probably makes a guy like Lou Dort potentially expendable. But then does that mean Wiggins and or Cason Wallace is now ready to step up, and or one of these other draft picks that they currently have right now, that are lottery or just outside the lottery as well too. Sam Presti is lauded as one of the better GMs within the league, had yet to win an NBA championship. He can now scratch that off his bucket list. He is an NBA champion, general manager, and has picks upon picks within the war chest. This OKC team is going to be reckoned with. And it seems like he knew and somehow how like the world or the basketball world is going to change when it comes to asset management and the fiscal management, dealing with the luxury tax in the second apron, because he's going to have the flexibility to kind of move off things and continue to develop young guys to keep that amazing core of Vestiaire, J-Dub, and Chet Holmgren kind of in tow.
Well, listen, as long as you're getting the kind of productivity that you're getting from the role players, and when I say role players, I'm not using it to, make it seem like or minimize, any upside that any of these guys can have. I often look at this and say sometimes it's being misled that if a guy is part of a championship team and was a role player, that he's not capable of going to another roster and elevating that team and actually, enabling themselves to be the kind of players that they potentially had hoped they were going to be, or that they could potentially be if they are given more opportunities, to shoot more minutes, this, that, and the third. But what I do think is that the system that Daigneault has, and we'll see, because ultimately a system is always looks all good until there's another system that counters you, right? But we'll see how the Daigneault machine, let's put it like that, how the Daigneault machine turns out on some of these guys. Like, what we're seeing from the Jalen Williams and the Cason Wallaces, and from up and down the Kendrick Williams, like all of these guys, it's not like they don't come in and they don't give you what makes them look good collectively as an OKC Thunder team, to when they get transferred out to some other destination or to some other team, and what they need to do, or what they have access to contributing to, for them to be the kind of players that maybe they saw themselves being. So, but whatever we've been seeing from these guys, it's translatable. Like, there are so many other teams that could utilize what these guys can bring to the table. And it's a question of whatever deals that are being made, it opens up the floodgates for a guy like Presti, because he knows how to maneuver and what he's looking for and how he's plugging and playing and transitioning through other different players to get that kind of results that he's getting. So yeah, the guy's cracked the code, man, right now, which is ironic because most guys that are, like the Brad Stevens and things of that nature, that are throwing out a ton of money, that are all in on a window, now have to pivot. And maybe they got lucky, because the players that they're giving up or they're moving on from are still so good that they can still go to other places and still have, great careers and do great things and stuff. But yeah, I don't know if they have that, they can get that lucky a second time around with the way everything is ever changing according to, with the CBA.
Well, I mean, I think for the pick that they're making here, if the player comps are correct, Thomas Sorber from Georgetown joins the Oklahoma City Thunder roster. A guy who is obviously not going to have to come in here and contribute right away, can probably play more of the traditional four behind, because I think they kind of size J-Dub up. I think when they bring Chet out, or if they want to play small and play Chet at the 5, and Hartenstein kind of goes to the bench, J-Dub and Cason Wallace and guys like that end up playing 4. Thomas Sorber now is somebody who they can, again, take their time in developing and can play a more natural 4, at 6'9", saying again, two-way big, has good touch, great defensive anchor as well. So I think, again, it's a right fit for OKC. You can maybe say they could have maybe went for a more traditional type point guard to maybe bring somebody kind of off the bench to kind of initiate some offense, because they don't really have that. Isaiah Joe is not that. Caruso is not that. So maybe that's something that they could have added if they wanted to go another direction here too. But I think, when you're the world champions, you have a little bit of latitude. When you have as many assets that they have, you have a little bit of latitude. So I'm not going to.
They may not have been enamored. They may not have been enamored with the, with who's still available, with what, they would be having to spend because it's first round. Why go through all of that? You can, if you've already got guys that are still
need here at the 4 position. So
no, but what I'm alluding to, Shaw, sorry, didn't mean to interrupt you in that way, but what I'm just alluding to is that maybe they see that they can still develop that through some of the guys that they currently have under roster, rather than going through the trouble of saying, if I draft somebody and have to pay them on the rookie salary as a first rounder, and they've got a couple of guys already locked in within the next year or two, that they can address those particular needs that you're probably thinking would have had to have been looked at because they have the draft pick. You get what I mean? So.
Yeah. Well, again, I'm just not going to question, the NBA champions. They got it on lock, and God bless them for keeping it pushing. And I think in making the right moves, to make themselves, viable here. Couple of other quick thoughts here too. How many picks are we away? Actually, I don't think they have a pick in the first round, right? The Knicks are kind of in the midst of their coaching search. As we're waiting for the pick for the, I guess this is actually going to Portland now. I'm trying to keep track of all these, pick swaps, if you will. Memphis picking for Portland here, it seems like. But what are your thoughts on the New York Knickerbockers and the coaching carousel that they've been on? First, they're trying to get all these coaches who are on the contract, get rebuffed in every capacity. They fired Tibbs without seemingly actually having a plan. A couple of names have emerged here over the last couple of days. Maybe not all names that everybody, not intimately familiar with the NBA will know, but they're trying to do their due diligence here. But your thoughts on the Knicks coaching search and just kind of like what's next for New York?
Whoever the coach is, I'm sure they're lucky that they've got Brunson and they've got Cat, but I don't know if they should feel any level of confidence in the ownership and, the organization as far as in as a whole, with going through the necessary steps that give confidence to anybody who is a part of a run that the current Knicks are on, right? Like, they've been in the playoffs. They've accumulated 50 plus wins, right? Like, I don't understand how we got to this point, but if you're going to get rid of someone, it would have to be with someone else in mind that you knew from jump you were going to go hard at and go after. And just the fact that we've gotten to this point, I just feel bad, for the Knicks fans, because that's not what we should be talking about in the offseason for the New York Knicks. It's the last thing you want to be talking about. It would be different if the New York Knicks got knocked out of the first round. They got to the Eastern Conference Finals. And so I just feel bad for the Knicks fan base in the sense that, like, if there's an actual plan that was supposed to be implemented in what they were doing as far as establishing a new coach for this team, and they've struck out, it clearly meant that they didn't do what they were supposed to do to position themselves where not having a coach at this point gets talked about more than us addressing what would be the next step for them to get to the NBA Finals.
I think there was a little bit of almost like New York exceptionalism. Like they were riding high, made this great run, knocked off the defending champs, only to lose to an Indiana Pacers team. And there's some of the aspect of like, well, we're the Knicks. Why would you not want to coach for us? And I do want to put a caveat into that. While many of us on social media were laughing, oh, another one, like Shams even put that out there, like DJ Khaled, that they tried to usurp, if you will, the process and get another coach from another different team. But that's the team rebuffing that, those notions. That doesn't mean whatever coach wasn't potentially interested, but the coach or the team just wasn't allow you to talk to their head coach who they had under contract. So that's a small caveat to that, but we just love to kind of poke fun and make jokes. That's just kind of the society that we're in. But they clearly fired Thibs without a real plan and understanding, feeling like, okay, well, do we have somebody in line? And when they were talking about it could still be a Johnny Bryant and guys like that who come on, I just could not see a team that made it to the Eastern Conference Finals, with the Eastern Conference now looking as wide open as it has been, in a very, very long time, that you're going to bring a rookie head coach into this situation. Now, conversely, we saw the Boston Celtics do that a couple of years ago with the unfortunate firing of Udoka and then bringing in Mazzulla right away. But I can't imagine that the New York Knicks would be as so bold as to have a freshman rookie head coach take this roster and feel like that whoever that is can take them to the promised land. I just don't see it. And I'm just trying to figure out what their actual plan will be after so many failed attempts so far.
I want to speak to that part of it, Shaw, because I'm glad that you kind of use that as, I guess, a comparative and an analogy, so to speak, as far as what took place here. But one thing I will say is that the situation with Udoka, remember, Mazzulla was a part of the franchise, right? a part of that process. And unfortunately, which I think to me speaks more about whatever was going on between, Leon Rose and Tibbs, or maybe Dolan and Tibbs. It's hard to imagine that if you went through the trouble of firing Tibbs, and let's say your plan A was going after Jason Kidd and all those people, and then your plan B would be, who on Tibbs' roster could we offer this position to, right? Because at least it keeps a little bit of what Tibbs established as far as that Knick culture goes. I believe they didn't even have that to them, because I think that Tibbs had loyal people that wanted to, work underneath him or learn from him or coach with him. And so if you're the Knicks, the fact that even if your best intentions was to go after another high profile person, the fact that you undercut even the ability to look at anyone else if you didn't get those guys up and down that roster of coaches that Tibbs helped construct and bring to the table, that to me, I think resonates more about the miscalculations and ultimately the, eating crow, so to speak, in that it's just a bad look overall if it's not handled properly. And I think that to me is the part that I have a problem with more than anything else. Because to your point, they probably could have had somebody, but now they don't have anybody. And anyone that you're bringing in clearly has to be someone either that is going to be really in tow with the Knicks and what the vision is going to be, because to be damned, like they know that coming into this, the pressure is going to be all on them to make it right, because everyone's going to say, you're not even better than Tibbs. So then you're going to feel the ire of the fans, not to mention the players, not to mention you're going to basically have to, you have to take the sword, right? Because the Knicks front office is not going to do that. When have they ever done that? So
there's a lot of responsibility within that Knicks organization right now to kind of get this right. But I was just curious as to your thoughts here, because it's not something we've been able to talk about on the show. But as we were talking, the biggest mover and shaker and surprise in the draft happens now at 16 with China center Yang Hansen going to the Portland Trailblazers. Now, I don't know much about this young man, so I'm not going to sit here and try to wax poetically. I don't know if this is kind of a draft and stash situation, because if he really is going to Portland, you got DeAndre Ayton and you have Donovan Clingan there as well too. So not to say that, again, you can't have backup bigs, but if you're drafting somebody this high, within just outside the lottery, you'd imagine that you're going to try to give him some minutes and some reps. So I'm not sure if this means kind of doom and gloom for what would probably be DeAndre Ayton, as he has been rumored to be in some trade conversations and discussion. But Yang Hansen jumps from what was most people's somewhere in the second round picks, not even expected to be picked until tomorrow, jumps basically X amount of picks to be, number 16 to the Portland Trailblazers, if the Portland Trailblazers are actually keeping him. Pretty big surprise here.
Yeah, pretty significant. It'd be hard to imagine that if you went through the trouble of getting and keeping it and drafting him, that you don't have him on your roster, which again, to your point, makes Ayton and or Clingan, expendable. I'd say it would make Ayton more expendable than Clingan.
Clingan's not going anywhere.
I think he's a solid player. So I would probably work with that and then move on from Ayton. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think DeAndre Ayton still has some teeth in the game. I think that he can be. He's a serviceable, solid center who, if given an opportunity, can certainly help. Maybe a middle of the road team take a risk. He comes in with the right attitude, right mindset. Can certainly help a team that's kind of like in the middle, playing like potential. But
I like what Portland is doing in general. Like, they had a late run last year that many of us didn't see coming. Danny Avdija, like, he was really hooping. Like, that guy's a legitimate basketball player. And so I think he kind of outshined, Jeremy Grant and, some others on this team. You're just like, all right, well, this Trailblazers team is maybe not as devoid of talent as we think they are. And again, Ayton missed so much time. It just allowed Clingan to get reps that he maybe wasn't necessarily expecting himself, but he was able to shine in that, in addition to Shaedon Sharpe, who they've been waiting to really kind of pop for a couple seasons now. So I don't want to even say another thing without mentioning, Toumani Camara as well, too. Like really an elite, I don't say elite, but a really good two-way player. I think he made third team all defense this year. So, this Portland Trailblazer team has some chops. I think they just, re-upped or, Thibault opted into his extension. He wasn't really much of a factor for them. I know that's your young dude as well, but they have a lot of young guys and players who are interesting and could be like kind of, dressing pieces for some other rosters if they ultimately want to make trades, but guys who they can still try to develop as well too. So I think with the addition, of Yang Hansen here, we'll see what ends up happening with DeAndre Ayton, but I think Portland's going to be a mover and shaker, especially after already making the move for Jrue Holiday as well. Portland is a team to definitely watch here this season. Again, the West is tough; like it's really, really tough out here. But the Blazers feel like they may have a little bit of something with this current roster and the way that they're currently constructed.
Yeah, Minnesota Timberwolves. Their pick is in. Is it Johan Beringer from France?
Like Johan to me, brother, but try to fancy it up.
I try to when I can. But Beringer. Yeah, how about that? Listen, man, France.
Yeah, France is the feeding ground here for the NBA.
Right. Get a center. Get you a forward, a swing. I'm telling you, man.
I love this. Quick. Scouting report, a big man who is as raw as sushi. So we'll see how he goes.
Was he talking about Yang, or were they talking about?
No, yeah,
no, okay.
Beringer. So going to a Minnesota team with another Frenchman, so there's something there for as long as Rudy's going to be in Minnesota because he's rumored to be on the block as well. Minnesota obviously needs to figure out what they're doing with Julius Randle. So if they're going to be able to run back this, I want to say miraculous, but this pretty really exciting run that they had with a roster that they weren't sure was going to translate the way that it did when they had a cat, but they basically get to the same level of success, unfortunately, and then ultimately get bounced, in the Western Conference Finals. But I don't know much about Mr. Beringer here, but I think if he's going to come alongside and play alongside Gobert, that doesn't give you much versatility within that center lineup. It seems like it'd be a lot of like, hey, a big guy, shot blocker, trying to help roll and protect the rim, not giving you any versatility when it comes to scoring. And I think that's what they have to figure out what they're doing with Julius Randle and Naz Reid as well too. But we'll see how the Minnesota Timberwolves try to play this thing out.
Yeah, absolutely. You're tuned to The Baseline. Callie Warrenshaw discussing hot button topics of the NBA. Let's jump into a little quick break. And, when we come back, I know that there's a couple of other NBA topics that we still needed to kind of dig our heels into. We didn't get a chance to really kind of dig into the trade that the Boston Celtics made moving Jrue Holiday. Talk a little bit about that. And also the Lakers. Lakers being sold for a ton of Skrilla.
10
Billy. So we definitely get into those things, and obviously we'll talk a little bit more of some of these picks that have been taking place. The NBA Baseline Watch Party. Don't go anywhere.
Welcome everybody to another episode of Heavy in the Paint. Gerald Brown and the big man, Mr. Rick Mahorn. Next guest right now. It's an honor and a privilege. He's a gentleman. He's my brother. He's a former NBA player. Owns a Super Bowl championship. One of the greatest point guards to ever play in the NBA. Lyricist, icon. B.J. Armstrong. Cato June joining me. Kenny Anderson. Pete Rock himself. Styles Zoo joining me. Mr. Penny Hardaway.
The legendary Mr. Charles Oakley.
MJ, Reggie Miller, Brad. Guys I went to war with had my back more than my teammates.
Hip-hop has been through so much ups and downs. You know what I'm saying?
Next face of the NBA gonna be, because right now, whether you love it or hate, there's still LeBron James.
They don't get it done for a number of reasons. I mean, it just happens. That's why you gotta love the NFL.
All right, you were Big Ten Player of the Year. But if you couldn't hold that, all the other stuff didn't matter. So
really ever fully officially retired. I think I just walked away from the game. That was it.
Make sure you hit the subscribe button. Heavy in the Paint.
Welcome, everybody, to the Gimmick Infringement Podcast. I am Brad Winchester.
And I am Tyler McDowell Blanken. Join us every week on GI, where we talk about what happened in pop culture, our lives, and most importantly, professional wrestling.
We're back, Cowley Warren Shaw, Baseline NBA Podcast, and this is our the inaugural NBA Draft Watch Party, brought to you by Millions.co. So be sure to check out the Baseline NBA Podcast. This will be this will not be the first, and certainly our partnership with Millions.co allowed us. It won't be the last.
Okay, there you go.
Because we've done a couple of live wrap ups through our peoples with Millions, and I know that the 19 Media Group family will certainly be venturing into that space as well too. So we got good things popping off, but as always, man, always discussing the hot button topics in the NBA. Right now, the hot button topic is the 2025 NBA Draft, and I believe right now the Washington Wizards were on the clock, and I believe their pick is in. So our man Adam Silver is going to come out and let us know who the Washington Wizards are going to select as their second pick in this year's NBA draft. Unless we're saying that, again, there's a trade.
Yeah, it's hard to kind of keep tabs on where all these guys are going or whatever the case would be. My latest, looks through the interwebs here is saying that this is a pick that they've already obtained from Memphis. So this should be their pick. Be really interested to see what they do here. Shams is on my TV. Don't know what he's saying because obviously we're recording and going live here. So no idea what Shams is talking about right now.
I think they needed to make sure that they put Shams on the television. You can't be paying this man this much money. He hadn't been on the TV as much. So
yeah, well, I mean, I do enjoy the reserved tweeting, right? Because remember when he and Woj were at their peak and kind of battling, they're telling us 4 picks down the line, 20 minutes before things are happening. So like there was no suspense. So the league has kind of said, hey brother, let's tone that down. And so we can actually try to enjoy the draft like for what it really is and not just watching our phones and social media to say, okay, the pick we already know 2-3 picks down the line while we're still having conversations. So, but as I'm saying that, it says Washington is trading Walter Clayton Jr. at number 18 to Utah. So that is a interesting situation here. So he goes to the Utah.
I was wondering when he was going to get. I was wondering, when he was going to get selected, and I forgot that we didn't get an opportunity to to talk more about him. I was thoroughly impressed with what he did during the NCAA tournament. I know a lot of people, looking at the Florida Gators as as a team collectively, but he really stood out to me, and I'm surprised that he fell as far as he did. But again, just such a guard laden draft that I think it really came down to what organizations were looking for. But I would not be surprised if, given the opportunity, he comes out and he shows out in his rookie season, as long as it's on a team that's going to give him the opportunities for him to kind of display his talents.
I mean, it's a good pick, especially at this stage. So Utah clearly trying to get into the talent aspect. Walter Clayton Jr. will be added to, Mr. Bailey, and what I think is a reshaping of the Utah Jazz franchise and organization. So they're not afraid here to make this move with whatever roster guys that they currently have. And as I alluded to, they shouldn't be tethered to anybody that's currently there, inclusive of marketing and Kessler, why I think good players, but they're not going to get you to the next level. At some point, you need to tear this thing down to the studs. So Walter Clayton Jr. will have an opportunity to compete, challenge, Mr. George for some minutes there and at that spot, whether they keep Sexton and Clarkson, as we kind of touched on earlier, but we'll play alongside. We'll have some opportunity to shoot and even be an outlet for some other guys on the roster. And I think he and Bailey can complement each other in a way that should be really positive. So I like what Utah is building here. I think this is a good pick, especially for where it is.
Yeah. And listen, the Utah Jazz, I think, again, watch for the kind of players that they're getting, because these are guys that took their teams deep into the NCAA tournament. Filipowski with Duke, Clayton, like these guys are winners, right? Again, it just really depends on the kind of coaching that they're going to be surrounded by. They're going to be in a space where they're isolated, so they can come up and they can really help the Utah Jazz if that's what the intent is. And maybe that's what the overall gameplay is, or the game plan is by Danny Ainge, and the way that he is evaluating the talent and the kind of guys that he's putting around, what the future may look like for the Utah Jazz. So
so we're talking about two teams or
guys that come out and do that.
Yeah, but a couple of teams who are saying, you know what, let's try to reset our deck with young talent. And while there's varying degrees of how talented this draft will ultimately be in terms of all-stars, there's the sentiment that they have a lot of, 10 to 12-year guys within this draft. So they may not all be superstars per se, but guys who can be really solid contributors. So if you take into account if New Orleans, what we already kind of discussed with Joe D, and now the Ainge and Son doing in Utah, getting these two picks here now in the top 20, clearly they're trying to reset their proverbial cultures to some degree. And I think this means probably more fireworks next week, as free agency opens up, and we might see a marketing trade. We might see a Zion trade. We might see Herb Jones or Trey Murphy, put into Walker Kessler or John Collins, all these names who, I want to say all those names have been bantered about, but these are intriguing names for other teams that are further along than both what I think Utah and New Orleans might ultimately be currently. So I like this move. I think Utah and Danny Ainge and company are doing the smart thing here by just continuing to add great talent to the roster.
Absolutely. All right, Shaw, I know that with our watch party, we're extending ourselves out basically to the 20th pick. So I want to make sure that we kind of chime in on a couple of things that have taken place, as far as NBA headlines go. First thing I want to kind of discuss is the move that the Celtics made. Big move, because obviously it eventually got them below the second apron, in moving, Jrue Holiday out, to the Portland Trailblazers. And then they also moved, Kristaps Porziņģis, to the Atlanta Hawks. And there's still speculation that they're not done, that there's a possibility that Derek White could also possibly be moved. I'm finding a hard time with that aspect of it, but listen, it couldn't be without a rhyme of reason, especially if their teams that are going to be offering a haul in order to acquire, the services of a great player like Derek White. So what do we make about, the Celtics? We knew that this was kind of coming. I didn't realize it was going to be this fast, but to see what the Celtics have gotten in return for that, you got to give credit to Brad Stevens. Whatever happens this next year and a half or year or two, the Celtics are going to be okay. Like the Celtics are going to be fine. It isn't as if they're getting players and, this is just a tear it down to the studs type of situation. There's still a lot of upside with some of the players that they're getting in return, and also assets to build while still getting themselves underneath that luxury tab or that second apron cap.
Yeah, the move specifically with Jrue and Simons, I think, was almost damn near genius, because it gives them so much optionality this year, and up even until the trade deadline to kind of assess who they are going into the next year. And I think maybe something shifted again when Halliburton went down, and you're just like, well, maybe we can still compete, right?
Still compete, right?
Maybe, right? You feel like it's going to be a lost year, but if they do move on from Jaylen Brown and or Derek White, then I think you're signaling more kind of the white flag. So that still is a conversation to be determined, because the moving off of Porziņģis was clearly a salary dump. The haul isn't nearly as great as it was for Jrue, especially when you think you get a pick back and you get Simons, who you could potentially flip, middle 20, is either 25, 26 years old, 20 points per game guy. That's a valuable asset in today's NBA. Porziņģis, they get off of just the money, but they didn't have to attach anything to get off of it. And that's what I think a lot of people thought was going to happen. Is like, well, Brad, you're screwed. You're effed. So you're going to have to give us assets, draft equity, in addition to take on Jrue Holiday and the $90 million or whatever it was that he was owed, and Porziņģis, whatever he was owed as well too. I think Brad did a really great job in not having to give up assets, but actually acquiring assets, while the Holiday deal trends better than the Porziņģis one in terms of like helping right now. You can't sniff at or whatever, sneeze at that draft, that tax bill that they've basically saved. I think it's like from 580 to like 180 now, or like something crazy. Like they're saving like $300 million just by making those two trades alone, which is crazy work. that is massive for work. So say what you want about the Boston Celtics. Brad Stevens is one of the shrewder minds, when it comes to cap management, asset management, and roster construction in today's game.
Yeah, absolutely. It looks like the Brooklyn Nets have put their pick in, and we'll wait momentarily for who's that going to be. Yeah, I agree with you wholeheartedly, Shaw. I think the injury to Tyrese Halliburton, I think the lost space that the New York Knicks are in. Listen, the Boston Celtics are not completely so far off. I mean, it's hard, yes, obviously, because you won't have your 2-star players there. But let's remember, too, that the Boston Celtics didn't win the NBA championship only because of Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum. They won because they had arguably one of the deepest rosters. And we've seen what happens when you have a deep roster, when you have a deep collection of players to go on this kind of run. Hello, Oklahoma City Thunder. So, if the Boston Celtics lean into who they are, lean into the Missoula mantra, and get guys who can, at least hold the fort down, they may possibly get one of their superstar players back. But somewhere along the line, you get a rising player like a Peyton Pritchard, who figures it out and suddenly becomes 6th man of the year-esque, you know what I'm saying? Like elevates himself on a different level. Derek White, right? 2 years removed. This guy was a tradable piece, and what we were scratching our heads thinking, is he the right fit for the Boston Celtics? And look at what he's able to have accomplished in 3 years. So it's all possible, and it's all there. And especially in the Eastern Conference, where there's so much parity going on right now, it's hard to not imagine that the Boston Celtics, just again, off of how Missoula coaches, the way that they play their game, the way that the NBA is trending, it's not, tough for us to be able to absorb that idea that they can at least be competitive, and being competitive gets you in the door, and you can do what the Pacers do as well too.
Yeah, I think what ultimately happens for Boston and a lot of teams is there does need to be a redefining of kind of how you play, with whatever roster construction you have. So you can say if Boston were to keep Yang and Simons, those are all guys who can still play Missoula ball, right? And shoot the three, but they don't play Missoula ball in terms of their defensive capabilities. And so, I think they'll need to figure out another way to be able to create offense that's not so 3-point reliant. And good, bad, or indifferent, they don't have a center right now. I mean, Keita, and if Al decides he wants to come back, I guess, but I can't imagine he's going to come back for this. But Keita was now kind of like the lone man standing when it comes to kind of.
They can always shop in Phoenix
as a true center. Well,
they can always shop in Phoenix, my friend.
Touche. While we're talking about the Brooklyn Nets, their Atlantic Division counterparts, if you will, go ahead and make a selection. Getting another Frenchman, Nolan Traore, another French, continued to come into the NBA. So as a guard with the Brooklyn Nets team that has all these picks within this first round, you just can't imagine all of these picks are staying with them. They're not going to bring all of these cap holes into this upcoming season. It doesn't really make sense. So either a couple of these guys, will be sent on, traded on, or will not be coming over to the club, I think, right away. But Brooklyn,
you mean they're not going to make it into the 40-40 club? I would at least like for them to at least get, at least get one admission to the 40-40 club before you move them on. It
is possible, but I just, unless again they're really resetting the table, as we talked about earlier, both Cam and Cam, maybe moving on. They decide to not resign D'Angelo Russell potentially. I'm not really sure what Claxton's contract is potentially looking like right now either. So if they're going to just say, we're going to be bad, then maybe bringing in 4 rookies. It's just that seems very atypical in today's NBA environment. especially for where the picks are. I mean, these are solid selections still within the first round, but I don't know that they're turning your franchise around in any real meaningful way. So I think one of these guys, if not two, might be kind of a draft and stash situation, even though they are here, or not here, but obviously in New York, at the draft party, if you will. But I think Brooklyn is going to be doing some other things with all these picks.
Probably helping to build out a new G League team. Yeah, there you go.
Well, you could always send them there. That is true. But you still got to pay them because they're first rounders. So
absolutely. All right, Shaw. The Miami Heat looks like they're coming in with the 20th pick. So before we get into who they select, and then we talk about your favorite team in Miami, I do want to kind of quickly touch on with the Los Angeles Lakers, the Buss family selling the franchise or majority of their ownership, and basically they're walking away 10 billion deep. And on top of that, Jeannie Buss still remains the governor. I don't even know if I don't even have. I've never even heard that. I didn't even know that was a thing, right? Like we never talk about that with any of the other ownerships in teams. That there's a governor.
Wick is still running things. I guess. Well, technically, Brad runs things per se.
Right.
So, like in Lakerland, it's Pelinka who's actually that. But the governorship kind of is staying over, or they're going to have like a 3 or 4 year transition before like they fully move on. And I was listening to Windhorst on ESPN. And this is maybe more nerdy stuff. So, people were tuning in. You're like, all right, well, I don't really care. But I found it interesting that the Buss family, like they are the Lakers, right? And I guess I don't pay that close attention to governorship within the NBA. But that is a source of their income at this stage. Like that is how they are billionaires, right? Where other team owners, governors rather, they have other private equity, other interests, other situations, real estate or otherwise, that have afforded them the opportunity to just kind of have this team. So where we're very much in a situation where governorship was just like, hey, I want to buy a team because it's kind of a fun thing to do. The Buss family is the Lakers now. Like that is their bread. That is their money. So there's a lot of things tied to that. I think emotionally that they wouldn't want to just give up even with a $10 billion sale. So if you believe Windhorst and some of the other resources out there that this is a part like the Dodgers ownership group from baseball now that has bought into this Lakers team, and they were, I love how this was phrased. The Lakers were the poorest, richest team in the NBA. Like they had the glitz, the glamour, and all the allure for a lot of teams and not teams but players to join them. But they didn't really have the deep pockets to spend that you would think they would. They had Lakers exceptionalism because a lot of people want to live in LA, and LA has a rich history, but they didn't have the deep pockets. Now they have the pockets, and they may not even bat an eye at first and second aprons moving forward, which could be scary if you tack that on to just the allure of the Lakers franchise as it is in general. So this is not an insignificant thing in any way, shape, or form, but we need to see how it develops.
It's not, but I do think that what this could also do, Shaw, it could reset the conversation about how the NBA then now looks at what's the next step as far as collective bargaining agreements, because this in a way kind of, again, it cracks the code, right? If the Boston Celtics, for example, were tied to, let's say, a storied franchise like the Boston Red Sox, like as a sports, conglomerate, or let's say in the next couple of years, the Philadelphia 76ers just happen to win NBA championships and then are tied to the Philadelphia Eagles. If you have an ownership that is tied to two of North Americans' most popular sports brands, I mean, the access to money and resources is unlimited. And what is the point of having any level of aprons when that kind of either partnership or that kind of, basically coming together, quote unquote, like the Avengers, you know what I'm saying? They say when you form these great superheroes or you form these great things, it also then kind of brings on all of these other unknown threats. You know what I'm saying? So again, the narrative changes. The NBA probably thought that they had this figured out, and maybe over the next couple of years, it made sense, or maybe it was a calculated move to force these kind of mergers and acquisitions, so to speak, because now you're letting go of the old, but the new is this expansive territory where ownerships are already leaning into the other major markets of other sports brands and now bringing it to the NBA, thus expanding the globalization aspect of things, but also meaning that there's more money to be played with.
Yeah, and I think for us as non-Laker fans, as our Laker resident, Jabari, kind of taps in, that is, I think the league's kind of like greatest nightmare, because I don't follow baseball like I used to, but I do know those Dodgers be spending. And, while it's led to, I guess, a couple or one championship here in recent history, they are not afraid to spend the dollar. And I know that this Lakers team will have long-term viability here now, because people are not going to stop wanting to go to the Lakers. Like, that's just not going to happen. That's unrealistic to think if you're a fan of any other organization and roster. So know that they have this kind of in their front pockets here now, with deeper pockets moving forward, is a scary proposition if all things are said to be true. So before we wrap up here, the Miami Heat, another organization who I do have a lot of respect for. And while many have said, Riley is kind of like, maybe the league is kind of passing him by, he wasn't willing to give up whatever assets were actually necessary to get Kevin Durant, in tow. I do think they make the best pick here available, drafting the Illinois guard here. Kasparis makes a lot of sense, getting a high-level play creator to join this roster. Whether or not Hero continues to start at that point guard position or not, I think it allows Hero to play off ball now. And I think this is a really, really smart pick here. Definitely the best player available for the Miami Heat, who I think, dropped a good guy here, who most people's account saying, like, this guy's going to be able to plug and play and run your offense no matter where he goes.
Yeah, I'm sure that they probably thought that he was going to already be off the board. So the fact that they land, in his lap, I think is a win-win situation. And again, whether it's by happenstance or it's a calculated move on their part, the Miami Heat didn't have to do too much in order to position themselves, which I think is probably the right player for their culture. And I think he can yield some instant results for this, for this Miami Heat team, for this upcoming NBA season.
Yeah, smart move for the Heat. So we're 2.5 hours in strong. I think this is a great place for us to wrap here. 20 picks, calling it even. We will tweet and kind of stay online, I think, for the rest of the first round. But I do want to thank everybody who's tapped in with us, for, the last couple hours here. 20 picks strong, our first ever NBA live draft broadcast. Shout out to Millions, man. Really, really appreciate it.
Shout out to our man Jabari, who is able to correct us correct me in my.
But okay, yes. See, you jumped
bad enunciation job of some of the players, and we obviously, I specifically apologize that I didn't enunciate the names correctly, but it's obviously with all love. I will eventually get it right.
Well, listen, we all are always doing our best here on the Baseline NBA podcast, and some of these names are difficult. So, but again, great opportunity here for us. I cannot wait to get into the NBA free agency here, literally just a week away before I head on vacation, and then Summer League will kind of hit us up as well too, man. But always a pleasure to kind of be rocking and rolling with you. So shout out again to our guy Tyler, who tapped in. Obviously our homeboy Jabari, P Money tapping in with us as well too, man. A lot of great stuff here. Stay tuned to the Baseline, man. We're gonna keep it rocking and rolling all summer long, especially with our new partners here, Millions.co.
Absolutely, man. And once again, continue to look for the Baseline NBA podcast. Go to www.thebaselinenba.com. Catch us on our media outlet threads, but also catch us with the 19 Media Group family, man. Throughout this whole show, you've kind of gotten to a glimpse of some of the great content creators that are part of the 19 Media Group family. It doesn't stop. Gimmick Infringement, Small Town, Hip Hop Hidden Gems, Heavy in the Paint. We did Hip to the Games. It's just the list goes on and on. So don't just think that we only talk about the NBA. We talk about everything, and that's how the 19 Media Group family rolls. So please continue to show the love and support. Head out to www.19mediagroup.com. For the Baseline, Callie, Warren Shaw, we appreciate each and every single one of you. Thanks for hopping on board with us for our NBA watch party, and we'll catch up with you next time.